people? Is it?
Okay.
Hey, good evening.
Hello, everyone.
Eugene, you want to say hello first and then we'll go around the room?
Hi, yes, thank you everyone for joining us for our first official land use meeting regarding City of Yes economic opportunity. Today's session is a very special one. We have consultant George James, who we are very happy to have assist us here for City of Yes. I'll turn it over to you, Katie, to go around the room.
Yes, thank you, Eugene.
Members.
Eugene, you co-chair of the committee. I'm Katie Bordenaro, co-chair of the committee, and very happy for this presentation tonight. George will present, the committee will ask questions, and then if anyone from the public wants to ask a question, we'll see how that works out. We're going to go around the room for our committee members, starting with Donna Raftery. Donna Raftery, hello.
Barbara Gamona.
Frederica Siegel. Bella Fitzgerald.
Michael Levine.
And just entering, committee member
Anita Brent.
with
her.
We are also joined tonight by
Connor Allerton, Director of Land Use for Councilmember.
Thank you for being here tonight, Connor.
Thank you, Connor. And could we also have, I just wanted to just quickly see if we could elevate other CB2 members that I see here. Valerie De La Rosa.
Got it.
And I believe we have also on Nicole Barth from Councilmember Rogers' office. So thank you for joining us, Nicole. Okay, so George, I know I'm very happy that you're here. You're unmuted. We're eagerly awaiting the results of your review.
Oh, awesome. So let me share my screen. And sorry, let me start at the beginning. Okay. Everybody can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot in here. I'm going to encourage you, like if I'm using terminology or jargon you don't understand, to speak up, stop me, and I'll try to clarify, because sometimes it's important to the discussion at hand. But as you know, and also Chair, if I'm going too long, please feel free to hurry me along, because there's a lot here and I'm not necessarily 100% sure what's of most concern to you.
George, excuse me for a minute. I failed to ask the members of the committee who zoomed in to identify themselves. So David, can you say hello, please?
David Gruber. Hello, everyone.
Susan.
Hi, Susan Wittenberg.
Is anybody else online that Sean?
Sean, you're muted.
Sean Sweeney, also a member of the committee. Thank you. Sorry, George.
Not a problem, of course.
Okay.
Okay, so as you all know,
thank you. I'm sorry, Sean here. Thank you.
The city is proposing the largest change in how we deal with uses in the zoning resolution since the 1961 zoning was adopted. The city has decided to break it up into these 19 different topic areas, and every one of their presentations are organized by these topics. We're not going to review all of them. There's just too much in here to do justice to all of the topic areas, but so what we're gonna do tonight is do a broad overview, and then we're gonna discuss some of the topics in more detail, especially those that I know will impact Community District 2. I'm not repeating the DCP summaries. I have links to their earlier slides and earlier presentations, and there may be other presentations that will be forthcoming. And they're informative. You should hear them. So currently, the zoning resolution has 50 pages of land uses. Each one assigned a use group, and then the districts in which they are permitted. It is well, the way we do this is essentially categorize every use into 18 use groups, and then we permit them by different zoning districts. And so you have this matrix of uses versus zoning districts and what's allowed and what's not. And, you know, there's a ton of exceptions to this, and you have to get down into the individual details, but this is a very useful guide to talk about, you know, commercial use group 6, for instance. I have to say, and I think everybody would agree, that the zoning resolutions uses and use groups are a complete mess. Right? They're hopelessly out of date. They reflect the New York City's economy of the 1950s when the zoning was written. And while there have been very minor changes made, there's never been a significant update since the resolution was adopted. And City of Yes is essentially to start over. They use the North American Industry Classification System, which is pronounced NAICS, which is a federal standard to help reorganize and modernize the uses. NAICS is nested, so you have, you know, related uses that are nested within each other. And so you have all of the detail, but the nesting helps keep them organized, and it's kept up to date by a third party. This is actually a very good idea, that they are essentially tossing out our outdated bespoke use groups and uses and replacing them with NAICS. It's a wonderful idea. And then on top of that, they're collapsing the 18 use groups we have now into 10. And I've color coded them by general use, residences, community facilities, commercial, and then production uses or manufacturing uses, as we call them today. So there are 10 of them now, and with the commercial uses, which we'll be talking about mostly, use groups 5 through 9. The proposal still has the 8 commercial districts we have now, but the difference between them, the boundaries, has blurred tremendously. And really, there are now only 4 functional commercial districts. C1 and C2 are basically the same. C3, which is waterfront, it does not exist in your community district. C4, 5, and 6 there are basically no differences between them. So in your community district, you have essentially 2 commercial districts now, C1 and C2, and C4, 5, and 6. And, you know, it's a huge mixed bag, right? You know, you have some incredibly ambitious changes. You have trivial changes, and it's 1,127 pages long. And I say that because there was an earlier version that went out that was 664 pages. And if you're looking at that one, you're looking at the wrong version. The one that you're looking at should be 1,100 pages long. But it's on the main incredibly ambitious and will have major changes that will impact every city neighborhood, their function and character. And so let's dig into some topics. All right, the first one is grandfathering. And I picked this because I know there's a lot of grandfathered uses in your district. And by grandfathered uses, I mean, it's typically stores, often restaurants in residential districts where they're not permitted as of right. And essentially currently, grandfathered uses can continue. They're permitted to continue, but if the use stops for a period of 2 years, the right to grandfather the use lapses, with some exceptions, which we'll go into.
George, I just have to give a little time out.
Yep.
In CB2's glossary, we no longer use the word grandfather. I know that it's a term, you know, it's an accepted term, but we have found that it's offensive to some people. So I'm just letting you know.
I apologize.
I'm letting the people who are listening know that this is your term and that we will have to, you know, reconfigure it.
Thank you.
language.
Thank you for that. I
Katie, I'm
appreciate
sorry.
that.
Just for clarification, we say pre-existing non-conforming uses. I know it's a mouthful.
You're exactly right, and I apologize for that. And I have heard this before. It didn't when I was putting these slides together, it was not on top of mind. Thank you for that. And I will make corrections to this before I send it in to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's not a problem. And again, my apologies. So pre-existing non-conforming uses is, many of them went vacant during COVID, as many of you know. And the proposal is to remove the time limits on the reoccupation of pre-existing non-conforming uses. And in practice, this is essentially placing a limited commercial overlay on all buildings with existing non-conforming uses. So let's talk about that exception though for a moment, because there is this exception written into the regulations, which is essentially, if you have a non-conforming use, it never expires. And that happens in R5 through R7 districts that are not located in historic districts, which is a kind of odd configuration. But there was a problem in the 1970s. There was a lot of abandonment in the city, especially in certain neighborhoods that were R6, R5, R6, and R7. And so you had people who were rehabbing abandoned buildings, and the ground floor commercial use had been vacant for years because the building had been vacant for years. And so this was a real problem for them because they couldn't afford to put it into a residential use. And so the city carved out this exception for these pre-existing non-conforming uses to essentially apply in these situations. And so now what the city wants to do, it wants to expand all pre-existing non-conforming uses to essentially be permanently there. And, I think, this is a very real question. Should we be changing the regulations to allow for permanent pre-existing uses, right? So essentially, effectively, commercial overlays in these districts. I mean, honestly, you could argue that the opposite should happen, right? The opposite being is that that we should remove the exception because we don't have abandoned buildings in New York City at scale anymore. Okay, next topic, home occupations. So currently,
Excuse me, should we interrupt you with questions
of course,
during the conversation, or do you want to go through the whole thing?
I mean, whatever the chair would like.
Well, on the non-conforming uses, of course, you can't expand it. You can't expand the non-conforming use. We have that problem all the time, especially with the hospitality industry, who want to expand their non-conforming uses in our district to use the backyards and to do this and do that. So how does that work if you're going to remove non-conforming and have a permanent like commercial overlay without no prior non-conforming uses considered?
So if you have a prior non-conforming use, you could continue it forever. Now you can not expand it. However, they wrote some exceptions into the expansion rules. So you can expand a non-conforming auto repair dealership, which is like one of these little things that they've written into here. Auto repair shop, not dealership. And so yes, you're right. But in the main, yes, you're right. You can't expand them, but you can continue them even if they're vacant for 2 years.
So that doesn't change under the City of Yes new regulations.
Yeah, it does not. But we're going to get into a way that you can expand it later on, but it would be under a different set of regulations.
Okay.
Okay. So home occupations. So currently, the way it works under zoning is that you're allowed home occupations but you can only have one outside employee. It can only take up 500 square feet of your apartment and no more than 25% of your apartment. Okay, they want to increase the size of outside employees from 1 to 3. They want to have the business use of your apartment increase from 25 to 49%, and no more absolute size restriction. So it's 49% of whatever size you have. It also removes the listing of occupations that were prohibited. Like, for instance, beauty salons and barbershops, they were prohibited. You couldn't do them in your apartment. They're going to remove that and just essentially allow any use that meets environmental conditions, meaning no offensive noise, vibration, smoke, dust, or other particulate matter, odors, heat, humidity, glare, or other objectionable effects. But there's no restriction regarding traffic or number of customers served. That's not an effect.
George,
Quick question. Would this apply in all R districts or just limited to certain R districts?
No, this would be all of them.
Including R1 and R2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a home occupation. It would be, yes, it would apply to all of them. It would also apply in C districts that had homes.
Thank you.
George, where does it spell out what offensive noise, vibration, smoke, etc. is in here?
It doesn't.
Okay.
I mean, there are other sections which, you have actual performance standards, and they're spelled out, but it doesn't spell it here. It just says, this is it. That's all we got.
Susan Wittenberg has a question. Unmute, please, Susan.
Yes. I just wanted to understand, so where you say no restriction regarding traffic or number of customers served, in a mixed-use building where we're now going to be having more commercial or office in with residential, having no restriction on number of customers served could be very intrusive. If you're having people in and out of a floor that had been previously quiet, I mean, am I misunderstanding that, or is that a reasonable?
No, that's absolutely reasonable. I mean, the reason I put this in here is because if you look at other jurisdictions, I mean, home occupations are common and they're often dealt with in zoning resolutions in other jurisdictions. And traffic and customer served is almost always in there, right? Meaning they don't want in your suburban subdivision, right? Having a lot of people coming to that house and serving a lot of customers, right? And creating a lot of traffic. It's almost always a part of the limitation of a home occupation, but it's not in ours. And that's why I brought it up. And it also currently isn't in ours, right? It's not like if they're removing it. It never has been a part of the home occupation in the New York City zoning resolution.
I just wanted to, George, interrupt you for one more minute. Yep. I see that there's a message in the chat from some members of the public. Please note your questions and ask them at the end. Right now, it's the presenter and the committee that can ask questions, or members of the board. Thank you so much.
And the other, another thing I think is, important to point out here is that with the hard size limit being removed, that could encourage owners to purchase neighboring housing and use it for their business, right? Because now you can have up to 3 employees, and instead of renting an office, you may be able to just buy the apartment next door and expand your business into it. It's something that, I don't know that anybody's really talking about or considering, but I think it's something that, somebody needs to be thinking about it. And the question is for the committee is, is the expansion of the size and uses permitted in the home occupations appropriate? And okay, so location of commercial uses within buildings. Okay, and I think it's important to understand how commercial uses in mixed use buildings work. So mixed buildings, is talked about in the zoning resolution, is a building with commercial and residential uses. And currently, commercial uses are limited to the ground floor and cellar in the neighborhood commercial, meaning C1 and C2, you could only have them in the ground floor and cellar of a mixed building. Now, neighborhood commercial districts are 2 FAR for commercial uses. So if you have a commercial building, you could have cellar, first floor, second floor. But you can only use that 2 FAR if you're not in a mixed building. That's the way it works now. Okay. And so therefore, you know, in a mixed building, your commercial FAR is always less than 1 because it can't go on the second floor. The extra FAR is used by residences, right? It's just this formula that's been worked out over for many years. And this change is going to change it, right? So commercial uses right now are allowed. This is, I think, LaGuardia Place. I took a snapshot of a building here where you have commercial is only allowed on the ground floor of this building. And this change will allow commercial here on the second floor. In C4 through C6 districts, commercial and production uses will be allowed on the same level as and above residential uses. So currently in the higher density commercial districts, you're only allowed commercial on the second floor, right? First and second. In C1 and C2, it's just the first. This proposed configuration is already allowed in some special districts, like the MX districts, and some converted buildings are allowed to already do this. But in most areas, you're just limited to the first 2 floors. And they're saying that you have to have separate entrances. There must be barriers, including 15 feet from a residence, and provide sound, vibration, and air quality mitigation. That's what they're saying. Now, any use allowed in the C4 through C6 districts will be permitted above residences, including things like bars and nightclubs with outdoor roof decks, something like this that you're seeing in the image. The outdoor roof deck would be considered an accessory use. Manufacturers, which we'll get into in a second at the expansion of the manufacturers. Commercial kitchens, arcades, dog kennels, like almost anything you can think of. That's not a heavy industry could go into a C4 through C6 building with residences. And I talked about the environmental protections for vibration, noise, and air quality, but they only apply to the same building, not neighboring buildings, and do not include things like odor, glare, and other objectionable effects that we have in the home occupations. It's just vibration, noise, and air quality. And for smaller commercial uses, which is less than 75 persons capacity, they're entirely exempted from the environmental standards. And so the question is for the committee and for all of the community boards, is the expansion of commercial uses in mixed buildings appropriate? All right, manufacturing. So the proposal also includes a very major change in the location of manufacturing uses. Now, if you've been listening to DCP's presentations, you know, they're focusing on the elimination of the differences between C1 and C2 districts, which frankly are minor, right? I mean, the differences between them and making them the same is not a very big deal, but a big deal is allowing manufacturing uses to locate in all of your commercial districts. They can be like, manufacturing uses that make sense, like bakeries or brew pubs, things like that that serve the community, but they can also be uses that do not serve the community and are not even open to customers, right? So you have a commercial district where you would have closed stores. And, you know, this may not necessarily be an issue for Community District 2, but I'm going to tell you, this is going to definitely be an issue in the Bronx and other community districts where essentially there's not as much demand for this space. And there is demand for, some manufacturing uses. And so ultimately the question is should manufacturing uses be permitted to locate in neighborhood commercial districts when they do not serve the neighborhood?
That's right.
Wait, that's the.
Oh, sure.
Okay. All right. Another topic. The CPC authorization for retail in our districts, retail and offices in our districts. Currently, a commercial use cannot be placed in a residential district without it being pre-existing non-conforming use or a variance. The amendment adds CPC authorizations for stores and offices and residences that are no more than 2,500 square feet on a quarter lot or 15,000 square feet in large-scale developments. So an authorization is a CPC discretionary action that is not subject to ULURP. The CPC holds no public hearings on authorizations. The community board is informed and asks for comments, but the city council and borough president are not asked. They do not weigh in. And so this is a, this is a way for, and they've been talking about this as a way for corner stores to end up in Staten Island, which has all of these residential areas. And to that I say, that may be right, but I can tell you it will be used in places where there is demand for commercial uses where they're not allowed. And so I'm going to point out a few, like a residential street with many successful grandfathered uses. This is how you might expand a pre-existing non-conforming use area. So you have a lot of these in your district. And if you have this is a street, Perry and West 4th Street. And I just picked this because I found it on Google Street View, where you have corners that have a pre-existing non-conforming use, and this one doesn't. And so if this building here wanted to have a 2,500 square foot store or restaurant or something like that, it can do that. And it is a way to expand these successful areas in our districts. Successful meaning that profitable and busy. And I will also say, you'll see this in Central Park West, Fifth Avenue, and other similar high traffic residential streets where commercial uses would thrive, but have been prohibited. And I point this one out just because this is a commercial use in a church. It's been there for about 12 years. And essentially they pay the fine that they get from the Department of Buildings. It's a cost of doing business. And it is a pathway for legalization of uses like this. And the question for you is it okay for smaller commercial uses to expand into our districts without ULURP? Sorry. Micro-distribution facilities. So currently, warehouses and distribution centers are use group 16 and can be only located in M and CA districts. So, but we've had increased demand for deliveries and delivery services, and there have been a lot of these dark stores that have been created throughout the city, especially in Manhattan, where essentially they're stores that are not open to the public, and they are repositories for goods that are delivered near the customers. And in 2022, the Department of Buildings issued a building bulletin which allowed these in C1 and C2 districts, but there were a lot of conditions, like they had to be small and they had to be at least partially open to the public. The public had to be able to go in and buy something in certain hours. And what this does is it formalizes the building bulletin. You don't want, whenever you can, you want to replace the building bulletin with good zoning. And their proposal is allowing micro-distribution centers in C1 and C2 districts up to 2,500 square foot per establishment, or in C4 and C7 districts up to 5,000 square foot on the ground floor, or 10,000 square foot above, up to 10,000 square foot above. It also adds a special permit for larger facilities. And the question is this a good solution for this? And it's not. It may be. It's not clear to me whether this is the right solution or not, but it is a solution that is similar to the building bulletin but a little bit more formalized. So nightclubs. Nightclubs in zoning terms are eating and drinking establishments with entertainment in the capacity of more than 200 people, or establishments of any capacity with dancing. And, frankly, nightclubs are hard to cite in New York City. And the proposal essentially removes the dancing restriction throughout zoning. In C1 and 2 districts, scheduled entertainment and cover charges would be permitted as long as the capacity is less than 200 people. In C4 through C7 districts, there's no size restriction. You could go up as big as you want. And historically, especially—
Question, did you say dancing is eliminated or allowed? I didn't catch that.
Well, it's eliminated from zoning. It's no longer mentioned in zoning.
So you could do dancing with no restriction?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the 200 person restriction, right? So right. Yes, you could do dancing in the proposal, right? The proposal is to eliminate it as a thing, and then focus more on the size of the establishment. And again, the size would be limited in the neighborhood commercial, less than 200 people. In the higher density commercial, over 200 people. And they're leaving a restriction where it's got to be in these larger ones more than 100 feet from residential district. That's staying, which is I was surprised to see that, because there's a lot of regulation removal in this, and that one stays. And but ultimately the question is, and however they do it, is local and regional nighttime entertainment becomes much easier to cite. And is that okay?
Question again, I'm sorry to keep interrupting.
Yeah, no problem.
Is there a limitation on the number of live instruments? How many recorded? Nope. Is there any kind of limitation which does exist in certain portions of the zoning resolution now?
Oh, there's limitations on whether you can charge a cover or not, whether there's scheduled performances, right. But not necessarily on the number of instruments or the types of instruments. That was something that was a part of all our rules that we have now, or many of them went into effect in the late 1980s, as I understand it, and that was part of it. And there was a lot of talk about discriminating against different types of instruments. And I read the reports at the time. But that's not part of it currently.
Thank you.
So another big change in how we deal with things are amusements. So currently, most Coney Island style rides are limited to C7 districts. And the change is going to allow many more amusements in many more places. So small scale in the neighborhood commercial, large scale in the central business districts, and the outdoor amusements are still limited to C7. And I show this picture here because this is a picture of a ride that has been proposed today in a hotel on 8th Avenue in Times Square, and it had been proposed as an accessory use. This 300-foot drop ride would be glass enclosed, and it has a DOB approval today to build this. However, it is being challenged under our current laws as not being accessory. But under these rule changes, you could have stuff like this in your hotel, in your destination hotel, these types of entertainment and amusement uses, not necessarily as accessory, but as of right use in the C4 through C8 districts, just as long as it's not outdoors. And, in other cities, business districts have turned into entertainment districts, and this shift really has been impeded by our land use regulations in New York City. And, the question is, should it be? Are these uses okay?
George, can you tell us the difference between small scale and large scale? Because, we have C1 and C2 for sure.
Yeah. So it has to do with the size of the amusement. I think it's 10,000 square feet. It might be 5,000 square feet. I can find out and for sure, but it's essentially you know, the stuff that the small scale stuff in C1 and C2 districts are going to be, you know, it can't be something like a ride like this, right? It's got to fit into the first or second floor. You know, this is going to be like arcades and maybe, you know, small amusements of some sort. But they're trying not to make distinctions. Right now, we have these very odd distinctions in the amusements that come back from the 1960s. And they really are focusing more on amusements generically and then limiting them by size.
Thank you. Frederica has a question.
Is this actually relevant in our district?
Well, I mean, it does apply. You have a lot of C1, C2, C3, you know, you have up to C6 districts.
So this is one of the areas that you think we should be very concerned about?
You know, I think it's, you know, it's up to you whether you're concerned about it. It's a major change in how we deal with this, right? I mean, right now rides are, you know, a Coney Island thing for the most part in New York City. And this is a major expansion of it. And I think, you know, I think when you take the amusements along with the changes in nightclubs and, you know, the ability to put these on any floor, you know, you have you know, the potential to really change your business districts, right? From centers of commerce to centers of entertainment. And I think that's a larger planning question and the future of New York City, which I don't know that anybody's really been talking about, but this seems to be an implementation plan to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, I am going to talk about casinos for a second, because casinos were always a part of this, and at the very last minute, they were removed. The casino text is actually going to refer out this week. It was heard at the CPC today. And the casino text is notable for what it does not include. If a gaming license has been granted, there are no bulk restrictions, no FAR, no height, no setback, nothing. If it has a gaming license, it complies with zoning, except for uses. You know, essentially you could have to have gaming, hotels, restaurants, amusements, or other similar uses. And it is allowed in C4 through C8 districts and M districts, which means that a casino can be sited in any community district in New York City. The text, you know, I talk about the text for zoning for economic opportunity as being 1,127 pages long. This is all of the relevant zoning text for the casinos. This is it right here. It's so simple. It's essentially the city has punted the entire thing to the state. And as long as the state approves it, that means they could go basically anywhere and, you know, in these zoning districts. And, you know, should the city be planning the design and siting of these facilities, or should it be left to the state and the applicants? Research laboratories. Now, this one's a little niche, I admit, but I think it's worthwhile to talk about briefly. The amendment changes research laboratories to use group 7, which would be permitted in all commercial districts. For decades, zoning classified research labs as use group 17, which were allowed in M districts. And you have some of these in the Hudson Square area. In 2016, the city published this memo that said that they would interpret most research laboratories as use group 9, which meant that they were allowable in C2 and higher districts, as well as M districts. This change is going to get rid of this memo, and essentially research laboratories will be allowed in most commercial districts. And there's going to be a special permit, which will allow them to locate in residential districts, as long as they're part of a larger campus like one of these two. Now, also in 2016, the New York City Department of Mental Health and Hygiene, not the Department of City Planning, sponsored a change to the health code that required certain research laboratories to register with the city. And this is now part of the law. And if you have one of these, research laboratories, you have to register with the Department of Health, because the Department of Health is concerned that an accident at a New York City-based high containment research laboratory would have catastrophic consequences. Now, I foiled a listing of registered research laboratories, and the Department of Mental Health and Hygiene rejected the request because to release the names and addresses of these facilities would constitute an untenable security risk. And what they're worried about is an accident at these, or malfeasance or terrorism, because you could have lab leaks and things like that. So on one hand, the city is making these really easy to cite, basically anywhere. And on the other hand, the city is saying that these facilities are too dangerous to even disclose. And an accident could cause, in their words, catastrophic consequences. Now, listen, I am not pretending I have any expertise in this area. I don't. But I find the lack of consistent messaging on this concerning.
Well, George,
Yes.
I just want to point out, I mean, we have one of the major universities in our district.
Yep.
NYU.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Of course. Yes.
It's not a hospital situation for us. I think it's an academic institution that concern.
Absolutely. And, and if I may, we used to only put these things in M districts. And then over time, it was like in some C districts, and now it will be anywhere. And, essentially that movement from, M districts to basically anywhere, this is essentially the only time it's going to be coming to community boards to say whether that's all right or not. Because that memo that I pointed out was never went to city council, was never, anything that went to community boards. It was just a policy clarification. And, I think land use decisions need to be made with the input of the elected officials and community boards. And I bring this up because, this is the only time where you're going to be asked your opinion about this. And I just find the lack of consistent messaging on this very concerning, right? Should it be easier to locate anywhere we want to? Or should it be should we be concerned? I don't know the answer to that. And I wish I got a better answer from the city on this. Okay.
Thank you.
So at this point, I'm going to move off the specific topics and just go over a few thoughts and considerations for you all, and then we can get into discussions and questions.
May I ask one question before you do that?
Yeah, of course.
Have you taken a look at the Soho zoning? Is there anything that would be immediately affected by any of the proposals that you have talked about? Or will that be part of the discussion?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that, because what they have done is they've broken it up into bunches of special districts, right? And I haven't specifically gone through the Soho zoning to see how it was affected by this. I've been doing the broad topics, and it's a great question, and I will review that and get back to you.
Thank you,
George.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, George, I would just add to that. I mean, I think that because of the Soho rezoning being such a very recent change in our district, and also just because of the large floor plates that are present in our housing stock here, I think the home office, for example, the home occupation provisions here seem very concerning in that it really does not seem to have a lot of restrictions or any kind of governing body on being able to open up a business and claim it's a home occupation. That seems, it's just on the face of it, that seems very concerning.
Yeah. I will tell you just, in terms of my concerns on this, and I'm just very surprised that this text is surprisingly hostile to housing. And DCP has repeatedly said that we are in a housing crisis. There's not enough of it, and what we have is too expensive, right? I mean, we've all heard this. But there are several of these proposed measures work against housing, both new and existing, including the second floor commercial in C1 and C2 districts will use the floor area that could be used for housing. In commercial districts, FAR is a zero-sum game, right? It's if you're using it for commercial, that means you're taking it away from housing. And so if you're expanding commercial, that means you're lessening housing. That's just the way the numbers work. And if you're allowing,
We have a hand when
yes.
you take us, when you're come to the end of the paragraph.
No, that's fine. I mean, yes.
Thank you. George, of course, the zoning resolution is antiquated. You could fix a typewriter in an M zone, but not a computer. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Yep. But what I don't understand, this is like, they're trying to push this through very quickly, aren't they? I mean, this changes the entire zoning for the city. And it seems to us that you're looking to vote on this in the spring, or parts of it, or at least the first part. But the real meat and potatoes, as you point out, is this commercial. I mean, I have notes here. I mean, it sounds, I mean, you could have somebody in apartment 3B and you're living in 3A, that has people coming in all day long to their commercial use, and you're living there and it's permitted, and it's like, it's a lot of not thought out things, I think. But what is the timetable for voting on some of this? Do you know?
So the land use guideline in terms of the statutory deadline was January 8th. However, they've extended it for a month, and they said that they will take community board recommendations up until first week of February. I think there's a letter Mark has from Dan Garodnick that outlines the expansion of time. They're able to do that because this is a non-ULURP action, meaning that your standard 7.5 months for ULURP is not required on this type of land use action. It's done by custom. So they are able to extend it for the extra 30 days like they're doing now. They could extend it longer if they wanted to, but it's unclear whether they're going to do
But the
that.
city council has to vote on this eventually, right?
Yes, eventually.
And
sure.
When do they foresee that vote happening?
I know Connor is in the room there. He'd probably be able to answer that better than me.
I mean, it's unclear, right? Because like what George said, it's a text amendment. So can you hear me okay on Zoom?
Yes.
Okay. Just checking. So, but it goes through the regular steps, right? It'll go to, except unless, actually, George, do you know the answer to this? Is it simultaneous at the community boards and borough presidents, this one?
Yeah, so the borough president has no separate
right.
time
So that's part of the difference between this and like a regular ULURP is it doesn't go CB then BP. It's like CB and BP together. And then it's city planning commission who can hold on to it for like, however long they want to. Yes. And then once they approve it, goes to the council and it'll go through the subcommittee and committee and then the full council, but those all have to get calendared. So it's really, I like you said, they're trying to move quickly, but there's no set date yet. But I would say, I think they're aiming for spring
of this year, of 2024.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like tomorrow.
Could I jump in on one thing? I'm sorry to interrupt, but Jordan made reference to that letter, and that, just to be clear, it probably will have the effect of a 30-day extension, but there's no reference to a time interval in that letter. What the letter says is that they will accept community board input up until the time that the commission votes on it. There's no guarantee when now anecdotally, they're telling us that probably will be what George said, which is in early February, which gives us the month of January. If you're a betting person, not to go back to casinos, but if you're a betting person, you can be reasonably comfortable that you could have your community board vote in January. But if the hearing gets moved up, so does your deadline without your having had the chance to comment. So that it is a little bit amorphous there too. I just wanted to make sure that's clear.
And it just seems that so much of this has not been thought through. I mean, it just seems like typically the city has an idea, let's go with it, and it's just not thought through. I'm sorry. That's how I feel.
Thank you, David. Eugene has his hand up.
Hi, thank you. So George, I wanted to ask, in the, 1,100 some pages of the texts that accompanies this, how much is dedicated to, enforcement or permitting? What city agencies are going to take over this type of service? So for example, the 49% limit on square footage, how is that enforced?
Yeah, that's going to be a difficult one, right? Because DOB is the enforcement agency and all this stuff. DOB enforces zoning. If you tell DOB they can't come into your apartment, they will go away. If you tell them because essentially you have they need to get a warrant to get in. Now they actually have a way of doing that. DOB can get warrants and force inspections in units that you've said that they can't go into, but they don't. I mean, it's something that is rarely done. Right. And so you're absolutely right. There are rules that we're talking about which are going to be very difficult to enforce.
Right, the number of employees, the square footage.
Yep.
All of that. It's kind of you don't need to ask permission for all of these, which is kind of the opposite of starting a business and getting a commercial space.
Right. That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Susan's hand is up now. Thank you, Susan.
Hi, thank you. I tried to get the answer to this when we heard the presentation from the city last month. The 15-foot space between residential and commercial, is that above and below as well, or is that only side by side? And, I asked that having lived in a mixed-use building for a long time, the noise travels up and down, and no one was really able to answer that. What do you think?
Okay, so I know what section it is. It is 15-foot space or a wall floor. So you either have to be, the way it works is that you either have to be far, or you have to be go through these sound and vibration testing, right? So you could be right next to it, just as long as you're not being affected by it. But one of the things, there's a big loophole there, is that if you're a small commercial establishment, meaning a commercial establishment of less than 75 person capacity, you don't have to do any of that stuff. So if you're like a little bar, you can be right next to anybody, right? You're exempted from that whole section on environmental. Is if you're small.
Yeah, and most things are small. Especially
it's one of the things that actually genuinely puzzled me about this. It's like, if you're large and loud, there are all these rules, but there are no rules if you're small and loud. None. You don't have to go to that section. And it just seems to be poorly written, meaning like that you find stuff like that sometimes in new zoning. It's like somebody wrote it and they said, oh, that looks good. And nobody really thought about it like, well, gamed it out in how it would work out in life. And I think that's something that, I'm going to definitely comment on that. And they got to really rework the environmental stuff, because I think it's got holes.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. And let me just, there's I have a few of these thoughts, but this whole thing about working against housing, because it's not only, the second floor commercial that, in new stuff, this FAR is zero sum, but, you could replace second floor existing housing, at least in theory, right? So if you're a landlord and you have second floor tenants and you think you could make more money, but with second floor commercial, you could get rid of those tenants and convert that space into commercial. Now that's not trivial. You'd have to really, you have to have separate entrances, right? You could have it could be access from the ground floor commercial, but you could at least in theory do that. And why do we want to make laws that allow for things that we don't want? I think that's really the question. The urban design requirements, which I didn't even talk about, they actually prohibited prohibit ground floor dwellings in certain commercial streets. Can't have a ground floor dwelling. The removal of the 500 square foot size limitation, yeah, is it going to encourage people to buy the neighboring apartment so they can expand their business into it? That's also, you know, housing hostile. Authorizations for commercial uses in our districts, the permanent non-conforming uses are floor area that are supposed to be used for residential or community facility uses, and this is keeping them in commercial uses. And finally, you know, the expansion of the C4 through uses, expansion of essentially everything in C4 through C6 districts are going to discourage office conversions, right? Office conversions are difficult, they're expensive, they're unpredictable, especially if you have a big floor plate building. And so, you know, if you can tenant it out with, you know, the nightclub building, I think you'll see more of that as opposed to office conversions to residential. And I said these things to DCP, and they've said, City of Yes for housing opportunity will address the housing expansion issue, so that these, you know, these we don't have to worry about because they're coming back with something else that will expand housing opportunities. And second floor commercial is uncommon, where it is permitted now, and not many owners would take advantage. This is not entirely true, or at least in my own neighborhood, where second floor commercial is permitted now, and it exists in about half of the buildings, at least that I've looked at around where I live. Okay, others. You know, I think that there are limited advantages for neighborhood residents, right? So the introduction of manufacturing uses to neighborhood commercial streets could threaten the vitality of the commercial streets. We've been talking about, you know, for years about this, the dark store thing. Well, you know, if you have manufacturing uses on your neighborhood commercial streets, those are effectively dark stores. You know, they occupy spaces that we need to live: grocery stores, drugstores, restaurants, clothing stores, you know, things like that. Do we want uses that do not serve the neighborhood in neighborhood commercial streets? Because neighborhood commercial streets are there to serve the residents. They are not designed to be major destinations or employment or production centers. And essentially, by allowing everything into these neighborhood commercial streets, you're allowing them to become something else and to serve something else. They're not necessarily saying they will, but we're allowing the rules so that they could transform into something else. I think also the expansion of commercial and manufacturing uses throughout mixed buildings could cause serious conflicts with residents of the building, but also with neighbors, right? So all of the environmental stuff we've just looked at only applies to that building. So if you have windows that overlook the rooftop of another building, none of those environmental effects are going to impact you in any way. You don't qualify. Other than under the city noise code. And, you know, and then finally, the existing amusement and nightclub rules are definitely arcane. They should, you know, they deserve to be rewritten, but they were designed to prevent conflicts. Whether they work or not is another thing, but they were essentially put into effect to address conflicts between residences and these amusements and nightclubs. And some neighbors, I'm sure, will appreciate the increase in local amusements and entertainment opportunities, and others will see increased traffic and noise as a problem. But, you know, ultimately, when you put everything together, I think there's limited advantages for neighborhood residents. You know, this zoning, and they've said it, it's designed primarily to address the vacancy crisis. And as DCP has shown, post-COVID, commercial vacancies are very high. Landlords lack tenants willing to pay their rent. And this zoning vastly increases the uses that can occupy commercial spaces. And so what you're doing is you're increasing the number of establishments that can take up your space and pay your rents. So more potential tenants means lower occupancy rates if you're able to turn some of them into tenants. Now, another way to decrease vacancy would be for landlords to lower their rents. This is difficult, however, because very often due to financing arrangements that a lot of landlords have, where they guarantee certain minimum payments for their commercial spaces. And the question really is how much consideration should we be giving 2023 vacancy rates when we're modifying zoning that will outlive most of us? I just, this is something that it seems like the tail is wagging the dog. And we do planning and zoning not necessarily to deal with the crisis of today. We try to shape the city of tomorrow. Finally, these new regulations will likely transform the nature of some of the city's central business districts. And I touched on this earlier. And the idea that a lot of cities have seen the transformation of their central business districts from centers of commerce to centers of entertainment. And we've seen some of that, but it really has been impeded by zoning. In my opinion, these zoning changes could have been an implementation plan for a CBD transformation plan, one that tries to change CBDs into entertainment centers. But we didn't have a planning process that said that was a good thing, or community consultation or consent to develop. We just have the zoning that will do it. Now, I have no idea whether transforming the CBDs into entertainment districts is a good idea or not, but I wish we could have developed a plan that you all had input on and that people all across the city had input on, that was the future that we wanted and needed. And that's really, ultimately, when I hear the complaint about, there's not a lot of time to look at this, we should have been looking at these changes for years. And ultimately, this should have been at the end of the process, an implementation plan for the transformation of our commercial areas. And ultimately, that's not what we're doing, right? What we're doing is we're looking at zoning, which are going to have incredibly consequential changes, and we don't have a plan that explains it and why we're doing it, and that's concerning. That's all I have for you. There's a lot more in here. I'm very happy to continue the discussion as long as possible, and I will follow up with Mark on something more custom for the Soho Special District.
Michael, let me just
Yes.
do a couple house things. I was remiss, George, in not talking a little bit about you and our relationship at the beginning. So I think many people in the board know, but I saw a comment, I don't think the public understands, that like many other community boards across the city, we retained George to work on the City of Yes proposal to help us form our opinion and our responses, in general and in particular about our own board, our own district. So that's why George is here, and thank you very much. And if you could just say your paragraph about yourself so that everybody knows who you are, be helpful.
Yeah, I'm an urban planner. I have a small practice. I have for the past 15 years. I found that I do a lot of work with community boards. I like community boards. I like you all. I like the fact that people, volunteer their time to make the city a better place. And so that's how I've ended up working with a lot of community boards. And you know what? I will say that this is the first time I've worked with your community board, and I'm very happy to do so.
And how many boards are you working with on this particular project? So people get a sense of the scale, that'd be helpful.
What is it? I think 8.
Thank you.
7. I think in that range. It's most of Manhattan, south of 96th Street.
Thank you.
And 11.
I think Michael had a question for you.
Yes, thank you. A follow-up on your discussion of allowing non-traditional retail uses in storefronts. And you didn't touch on this point, so I'm adding it to your argument against it. What it does is it decreases the desirability of continuous retail frontage.
Oh, absolutely.
if we have dark stores which are doing deliveries, which is better than having fresh direct delivery from a truck on the sidewalk, it's better to have them from a dark store. But if we have too many dark stores, you can't rent it, you lose the continuous retail front. And that discourages additional retail uses. I think, George, we need to include that in our comments. It really has a deleterious effect on continuous retail frontage, which encourages retail uses of a traditional type.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Okay, we're going to go around and ask committee members and community board members who are not committee members to ask questions, and then we'll get to public questions. I see that Frederica had her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I found this very interesting. I thought it was a good kind of antidote to the presentation that we got from the city. In the end, each community board has to respond to the proposal. And I'm wondering to what extent you're going to help us each to craft a response that reflects the nature of the individual district rather than some generic approach where everyone who's working with you is responding to the same aspects. So I'm hoping that our community board can avoid a laundry list of complaints and just really focus on the things that are most important to us. So at what point do you think you can help us with that? Assuming everyone else agrees.
Yeah, I mean, I try to not make this a laundry list because I think there's a lot of things that don't apply in your district and frankly, much of Manhattan. But as part of this, I'm also putting together a more long form memo that can be cut and pasted from, and I'd be happy to do that interactively, meaning like if there are questions you have when you're putting together your resolution, I'm happy to be involved in that as much as you want or need me. But I'm trying to put together the resources that would be helpful for that for everybody. And so ultimately you can pick and choose what you want out of it that's important to you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in the room from committee members? Oh, Susan. Okay, Susan, thank you.
I agree that, of course, our response is unique to us, but have you found, I mean, I don't know how many boards you've spoken with yet, but it's clear from your presentation, our discussion, that there's a lot in here that's going to affect us in a way the community wouldn't have chosen. Yep. And we've had that with other things, like how many outdoor dining sheds we have compared to other neighborhoods. But yep. Are you finding the response is positive to this plan, or most community boards are sort of caught by surprise as well? And
I think there's a lot of concern, especially in the details. But it's hard to also characterize, right? Because reworking the uses and the use groups, like that's good. And the way that they're doing it is smart. It's clear that there were smart people behind this. Mm-hmm. But ultimately the larger goal of essentially focusing on trying to find tenants to fill commercial spaces, like is that necessarily something that all of us would say that's really critical? And I think ultimately, most of the community boards are like going, well, it'd be better to have something than nothing, but are we going to bend over backwards to essentially find a solution to somebody else's problem? And I think most of the people are saying that's probably not a good use of city resources or our zoning resolution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any members of the community board on?
I'm sorry, Katie, I have one more question.
Of course, Michael.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep throwing questions at you, George, but
no, it's fine.
You mentioned several times that what these proposals would do would be to decrease the opportunity for additional housing. And I agree with you. I think it's an excellent point. Do you have any idea what the city of Yes for housing opportunity might include, or is that a premature question?
There's information out there. I just haven't dug into it yet, Michael. this thing has overwhelmed my office. the current thing has overwhelmed our office, but it's a good question, and we should get into that. And if it's a question, I can look into it for you prior to you all making a resolution.
I think we would appreciate that. Thank you.
It's no problem.
Eugene, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to actually, in response to your question, Michael, about the City of Yes for housing opportunity, it seems the city has already started their information sessions for the housing opportunity proposals, and they have indicated, because I have attended the last one, and I do encourage the committee members to go and view that recording for the one that they did several months ago. They do intend to have much longer, I think they said at least a 6-month runway for getting these proposals out. So some of the information is already out there for the housing opportunity. So in answer to that question, yes, there is information out there. And I would encourage committee members to view the DCP presentation. I think it's about an hour and a half. The last was.
And if I may, I'm going to just, the reason why is because a housing opportunity will require a full environmental review, and they needed to disclose the scope of that environmental review in a draft scope document. Essentially, they had to lay it all out and before they had a certified application. In economic opportunity, they have said that there is no potential for any adverse environmental impacts, so that there is no environmental review. There is just an environmental assessment which says no possibility of adverse environmental impacts.
We hear things all the time. Yeah. Sean, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Do you plan, and does this committee plan to address other major amendments to the zoning, for instance, that the neighbors in places like Queens are concerned about, specifically, let's say, basement apartments and granny flats in the backyard? Or are we just going to ignore that and not interfere with their issues? We don't have very many of those here.
Sean, it's a decision the committee has to make. I think, we support our fellow community board members. It's okay. I think we support our, the larger community board members, but I don't know what the committee will think, but we have a lot to bite off ourselves.
But George, you're not going to specialize in that or focus on that, are you? Since we have so few in Manhattan.
Probably not. That will be the next one. I mean, what you just talked about will be part of housing opportunity, so it's not under review yet. But I generally work in Manhattan, so it's not such a big focus for me.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Carter has a question. Wait a minute, get this close so everyone.
So, my concern is about conflicts, and we're sort of the epicenter of community boards of getting the complaints about conflicts. And this seems like it's going to significantly increase all kinds of conflicts. And, can you think of a good way that we can comment on that? Because that's very difficult to communicate in a manner which resonates with city planning, and at least in my personal experience from having been through a couple of different changes, but that's what the residents have to live with in the end, generally, are those conflicts. And with a lack of measurement in place or any mechanism to measure impacts, it's very difficult to address them or separate them out.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you'll hear from DCP, well, there's the noise code, and, we have all these nuisance rules. And ultimately, if you've lived in New York City for any period of time and tried to actually use your relief for when you have a conflict, you're probably not satisfied with whatever resolution you had. I think you've got to repeat your concern over this to DCP But really, a person that you need to convince is your council member, and your council member is in the room. And ultimately, remember, is that if city council does not vote for this, it does not happen. And so if you have specific changes, they do these things called modifications, where they change the zoning text after it's gone through the CPC process. They've just made some changes to the carbon neutrality stuff, which were great. I'm really glad that we had that relief valve of city council to to rein in the worst. And I think that's really, talk to yes, CPC is important. Your comments are important, but do not forget your council member, and make certain your council member hears you, and other council members and the speaker hears you as well.
So just as a follow-up on that, one of the things that was talked about very briefly earlier were sort of the concept of performance standards and measuring those things. But if I remember correctly, when I looked that up, it only applies in manufacturing districts. But a lot of these new uses, is there a way to introduce some other new measurement system into this in such a way that it can be useful in allowing certain uses and not others? And I say that because we have a lot of very successful non-conforming uses,
yes,
that have been with us since 1938. And at the same time, we have many that have changed within that time period, especially within the last 5 to 10 years, that are suddenly producing huge impacts and conflicts when they never did before. So it's the use, it's the impact of the use. And I guess I just keep getting at that because that's really the underlying issue to the resident. And I think that that's where the flag goes up, is when something has that impact. And I think because we have so many non-conforming uses, people are okay with a little bit of diversity within some of the zone, but it's the impact. So I keep coming back to that because I just don't know how to create a different set of, a different language for that, because it just doesn't exist as it stands now.
Well, I mean, as you pointed out, in the M districts, you have performance standards for vibrations, noise, and in fact, when you have one of these manufacturing uses in your commercial zone, it will bring those performance standards with it. It has to comply with the M1 performance standards. And there are some limited performance standards for the environmental noise in mixed buildings. But you're right, we generally don't have performance standards for commercial uses or pre-existing uses, and we rely upon the administrative code and the noise code and stuff like that. And it's an imperfect solution. I think you're absolutely right that there's a lack of enforcement of our current codes on this, and we need a better solution. That's not in here, right, Carter? That's not a part of this. And I think longer term, that could be something that is introduced to zoning, but it's not in front of you right now.
If I can add to what Carter just said, it seems as though they've decreased some of the performance standards. If they're eliminating a regulation regarding the live entertainment, how many instruments can you have? They are weakening current performance standards that we do have.
They may be. That may be right. Yep.
Eugene, I see your hand up.
Oh, yes, thank you. I wanted to actually, I'm glad to see Connor Allerton from Chris Marte's office here. And so I wanted to actually ask him, as we move forward on this, how can we collaborate with your office, on some of the proposals here and get some of the feedback that you may have from, I'm sure you've been studying the various proposals, the documents as they've been coming out. But if you could speak to that, that would be great, Connor.
Yeah, sure. And like, yeah, I think I've already, had a conversation with George, and I think George did a great job of like summarizing a lot of the issues. And when we did speak, we came up, I think, with a lot of similar problems or concerns or questions, which is great. And it's reassuring for me, at least, that I feel like I'm on the right track. But the I think so, yeah, what we've been doing so far, and I brought like some notes to share with you all, but basically just been spending time with the text changes since they've been released, trying to understand, because I think one of the biggest sort of things to take away is that the narrative of a lot of these text amendments can differ greatly from what code changes they actually are codified. Right, a lot of it is about intentions, but they could have a lot of unintended consequences, which is a lot of the flags that George is raising. Obviously, they're not, and they'll say, I think something that we've heard throughout is, oh, well, we don't expect that to be how it's used. But it's then, the follow-up question is then why are you allowing it in the first place? And that's like a common theme throughout all of the topic areas that George mentioned. So what I've been doing is basically trying to, one, synthesize the text changes and what they are. So it's kind of like a biased or unbiased or maybe less biased version of how they summarize them. And then as well as some like impact analysis, some takeaways from that I have. And some of George, when we've spoken, some of your ideas might be combined in there too. I don't want to take credit for them, but so I wanted to share that with you today. The other thing that I worked on as well, and because a lot of it is just understanding what they're proposing, right? Like that's the biggest hurdle, I think, because it's so dense and there's so much of it. And so the other thing, and I think kind of one of the most impactful parts of this are the use changes. And it's also kind of one of the hardest things to trace because of how messy the use groups are now. It's kind of really difficult to see, basically, if you have this kind of district, what's allowed there now versus what would be allowed there once this passes. And so I attempted to summarize that through kind of like it's a matrix of basically every use group as they're summarized in the new 10 use groups that they're proposing. The 10, and basically every use group and where it'll be allowed. And then I tried to flag the ones that are new allowances, like aren't allowed in those districts now and would be under this text amendment. And because it's hidden throughout the 1,200 pages, but I tried to like pull it out and compare it to the existing allowances today. And because I think that's where you're going to see the biggest impact is these new kinds of businesses allowed where they weren't before. And I think the biggest theme that George touched on is production uses, especially in commercial overlay, because like right now, nothing near that is allowed in commercial overlay. And they're basically allowing a ton of new production uses in every commercial district, except for C3, but C3 is just waterfront. And then what you're going to see is completely serviceless businesses. There's going to be no consumer-facing aspect of the business in primarily residential districts. And this, I'm just flagging this because I think this is like kind of my primary concern. And I brought this up with DCP, and what they've said is, well, right now you can't have a brewery that sells beer that also brews the beer there in a lot of these commercial districts. So they're expecting a lot of like production and retail or goods uses in one business, but they're not requiring that. So that's again a problem where you could have a brewery that brews beer in the back and sells it in the front, and you can have a drink there. But you could also just have something that's just a brewery and you can't go in unless you work there. The streetscape regulations make it so they have to have windows, but that's about it. And so, there's creative solutions to some of these problems. I mean, one thing is like, you could require that. We have like percentage, like in the way that they have a percentage requirement for home occupation, you could have a percentage requirement in a residential district if you have a commercial use the majority of it has to be goods and services, and maybe a minority of it can be production use. Like, you know, there's ways to get around this that are accommodating to these businesses that they're trying to accommodate, but aren't just so broad stroke with so many unintended consequences. That's like an example of something, but I wanted to like share. I only printed 5 because it's a lot of paper, but I can also follow up with like the document. I'm also happy, but I want this to be like the way that you're working with George. Like, I want to be helpful how I can, and work through this together, because that's like the only way we're going to get to it.
And I thank you. I mean, I thank you, and I thank George. I mean, I think this text amendment is different from some of the others we've seen in that the scope is just so increased. It's so broad, and it does change so many fundamental things in the way use groups work and the zoning works. So it's good to have as much help as we can to go through this and create a resolution with the topics that are most germane to us. I would also add on that comment back to George. I think if you can take the time to go through the Soho NoHo zoning and then highlight how that would intersect with a lot of these changes, I think that is critical, because we have 2 big changes that are going back to back, which makes it very difficult to fully comprehend what's going to be the ultimate output of this, you know, in 5-10 years.
Yep, I will.
Anita?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you if you had looked at this idea of city as entertainment. Is very, I mean, we already live in that, by the way, so I feel like I'm an expert. But did you take a look at that specific use group? Because I think that is gonna, I mean, that really is driving out residents. Nobody's gonna want to live near a roller coaster.
Right.
Or a nightclub, or, you know, we already do, by the way. We already do. But this is at a grander scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think George brought this up and can go into more detail probably, but I think, I think one of the big takeaways in the expansion of uses throughout these commercial districts that you have in CB2 and citywide, and that's the other thing is like, there's certain things that maybe are like slightly more to be focused in districts like CB2, but this is so like wide reaching, I would say. And what it does is it creates so many new use types that are allowed just across the board, right? So it's really like hitting everyone in similar ways.
Go elsewhere?
Yeah.
No,
for entertainment, I mean, I think it is, you know, you can see it's just going to allow, and it's really hard to predict. Like, that's the problem, is it's really going to be hard to predict where they're going to crop up, because they're going to be allowed in so many new places. But I do think it is part of this pivot to attracting like a new kind of economy in the city that's not just in Coney Island. But yeah, and I think it creates this shift from commerce, like George mentioned, from business and office space to entertainment. That again is, I think, a different clientele than residents, because like what you have commercial uses in neighborhoods are resident facing, like they're goods and services that you would want on your block. But these entertainment uses are more, I would say, like a tourism industry than anything else. And it's really to drive the economy toward attracting visitors, rather than stimulating the economy through the existing residents.
That would have a big impact on quality of life.
Really
I'll just give 2 examples.
when someone was above you, or is this relevant?
There's 2 businesses that have multi-floor slides in our community board, and that's just an example of a very simple entertainment use, but it's the beginning of the march forward of how do you attract people. With an allowance for more, that will become a center point of, you know, a lot of places that are larger retail, over 10,000 square feet, et cetera, that have room for that. In our floor plates in a couple of areas within our community board allow for that. And on top of that, would get people to go there instead of other places in that area, because we're already a destination location. So it can actually magnify very quickly for us in a way that's not anticipated now with somebody who's trying to open up some new concept, particularly if the if the real estate market has a big shift anytime soon. So and it can also really activate upper floors, which is another aspect of this, which I don't think we think about as much. But we're starting to see that conflict on rooftops, on upper floor restaurants that are just starting to perk up now in our area. So it really is a lot of unintended consequences. Just that I think reading through this and having an imagination, you can see where this could go here.
Or intended consequences for the cynical. Donna had her hand up.
Just going to ask Nicole the same sort of question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Nicole, I see that we've that Mark has kindly elevated you to panelist. Did you want to say anything at this point? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
no, thank you very much. I actually am not prepared to really comment on this, but I have to say how incredibly impressed I am by Connor. Just really, really good job. And I think, in our area, in Councilmember Botcher's area of CB2, it's a lot different than maybe in some areas of CB2. Listening to the presentation tonight, which was very thorough and a lot of information, what kind of comes into my mind, and this is just me, is how everything really will have to be looked at by a case-by-case basis because of the amount of interruption to quality of life the West Village has experienced since the pandemic. So, that is, I think, the one thing that we worry about. But I think also with so many storefronts that are still empty, ways to get creative about how space is used would really be encouraged as well. So I'm sorry I don't have anything prepared or comment from the council member, but I just wanted to throw that in and say thank you very much to George. This has been a great presentation. Also to CB2, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us, Nicole. No pressure. Thank you so much. I do want to say that tonight has reminded me of a presentation that I think Anita and Frederica might have sponsored at Grace Church School many years ago by Municipal Art Society, discussing the rezoning of downtown Brooklyn.
The accumulation of unintended consequences.
Exactly. They were trying to get more residential and they got more commercial.
In Long Island City.
Long Island City. So we've been talking about this for quite a long time. I see that Pete Davies has his hand up. We've had a lot of discussion from community board members, and I see that Pete is here as usual, and I would love to have him ask his question or make his comment. Pete, there you are.
Can you hear me? I was going to stay on just audio, if that's okay. George, good to see you. Thank you for the really good presentation. You showed us an email from, I think, 2018 from, I believe, from Alicia Glenn to Carl Weisbrod.
It was a memo, but it was 2016 memo. Yeah.
And it's just the timing of that. Very interesting. That's 5 years ago. So it appears that the ideas, if not more for all of this, have been in the works for quite a while. And we have heard for many years the desire of many of the people who've invested in our neighborhoods for a 24/7 neighborhood, which this is pointing to. I think it's, I'm not sure there are carelessness in what's being presented. Maybe it's the right word, carelessness, because it is careless, careless. But I think this is intended consequences to just throw the rules out and let business be business. And as we pointed out, when city planning came and spoke a few weeks ago, they never mentioned residents in that whole presentation. And this is really anti-residents. And yeah, there may be some things about it that serve people here and there, but it really points in the direction of destination neighborhoods, entertainment neighborhoods, things that bring just lots of conflict. Yeah, I find it very sad. But thank you all. And I don't know what the answer is. I think they're going to ram this through, and we'll get what they throw at us. So, my one question to you is, I know many of the people that used to work for the city are now employed by the consultation industry. You know of any of the consulting groups that are working to push this forward?
I personally, I mean, there are a lot of groups pushing this forward. They are promoting a big listing of organizations that are supporting this. My own professional organization, the American Planning Association, has a letter of support on file for this, signed by the president of the local chapter, who signed it before the zoning text was even released. So it's like one of these things that I just don't understand how these things happen. I don't understand how you could support something when you didn't read. But that's apparently what my own professional organization has done.
Thank you. I think Mark, are you taking care of that background noise?
I'm looking for it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Are there any other questions? I didn't see any other hands up. Okay, thank you. I guess Eugene, I guess the next order of business, we will be meeting on Wednesday, December 13th.
There are some questions in the chat. Did you want to answer those?
I can't see them, so
I can see them, and I can go through them quickly if you'd like. If it goes on too long, please.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are will this apply to all types of leases? And I'm going to, just because zoning allows you to do it, it doesn't trump your lease, your condo or co-op agreement, right? If you can't have a home occupation in your lease or condo or co-op, that rules, right? This will just allow you to do it if you don't have those types of arrangements in your lease. About common areas in the elevator, in the apartment buildings. So if you have a mixed building, you wouldn't have common areas, meaning commercial would be segregated from residential. That's the way it's supposed to be. Now, I know it doesn't always work this way, especially with some non-conforming uses that very often are mixed, but it's certainly in new buildings, that's the way it would have to be. And substantial renovations. They would have to have separate garbage service. They would have to have separate everything.
But George, yep. We have such an old stock, and people are reusing,
indeed,
existing things. So it is probably a problem for us.
There's the rules, and then there's the practice. So the rules say they're supposed to be separate. They're supposed to be completely separate, yeah. But in practice, I understand that it's not always that way. And
yeah, I can probably confidently say, at least in the Soho area, the majority of buildings do not.
And there may actually be special rules in the Soho district, which is one reason I'm going to have to get back to you on.
Thank you, George.
And I apologize for it's good. This has been consuming, and there are still holes in my knowledge. I'm working for the community board on this. I'm working for several community boards in response to the question. There's questions about Soho, NoHo, Chinatown. Okay, which I'm good. I will look at Soho. Soho NoHo, and the Little Italy Special District, which I will also review for you. Some of these are just comments. They asked specifically about interactive experimental retail, and this is something that it's a new idea. This is something that would be permitted.
Keep the historic districts. They'll have a 3D.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just reading through most of these. What about POA rules? POA.
What's the POA?
I'm not sure.
What's the POA?
I don't know what the acronym means.
Place of assembly.
Oh, place of assembly.
Place
oh,
of
okay,
assembly.
place of assembly. Oh, okay. So there are place of assembly rules in the zoning. Essentially, they say if you have to get a place of assembly, if you're commercial, you have to, you need a place of assembly certificate from DOB if you have a capacity of more than 75 people. And if you have a capacity of more than 75 people, then there are certain environmental requirements that you have to have if you're in a mixed building. However, if you don't have one, you're exempted from those environmental requirements, meaning so if you're small and loud, it's okay, which is one of the things I think is like kind of, all it matters is how loud you are. It doesn't matter how big you are, right? At least when it comes to sound. And I think it's just that's something that if we pointed that out, I'm sure that they would address, and that's part of what the review is for. This is a gift to owners of rental housing, co-ops and condos with the power to maintain the restrictions. But you know, there's a lot of leases have a lot of rental leases have a lot of restrictions too. It really is whatever the landlords want to put in those. Second floor commercial uses are not at all uncommon in Soho NoHo. That's right, because they're allowed in Soho NoHo in the manufacturing areas. And there's some stuff on City of Housing Opportunity. Yes, they had a scoping session. There's a lot of information on the draft scoping document. There's a comment, everything is legal in New York until someone complains. There's a lot of truth to that. They go to the squeaky wheel. Okay, what is this? Okay, what does this mean for NYCHA Commons, where rap and hip hop was born? Will those be community spaces be smoke shops now? Oh, that's so interesting. So NYCHA has a lot of these community rooms and community facilities for community centers. There is actually a way using the 15,000 square foot authorization on the residential campuses to convert those into commercial spaces or maker spaces. And so in theory, there would be a path forward to making those community facilities into smoke shops. I don't think that would happen, but it's in theory possible.
I think you've answered all the questions I
think so. There's one more on Soho NoHo, which I will get back to you on.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Is the committee happy with this for now? Okay.
No, but happy with the
yeah, satisfied with what we've been able to do. And certainly thank you, George, because you've given us such a good structure to do the next step.
It's my pleasure, and I actually don't envy you in putting all of this information together into a cohesive recommendation. There's just so much here, and but I will help. I will help as much as I am able.
Okay, sounds good. I will just point out to the committee that our next meeting is on our regularly scheduled second Wednesday of December at 6:30. And even though there's been given this seeming flexibility on getting our answer in, even DCP has said that don't depend on it. I think that's what we've heard. So by December 13th, we should have a resolution which we can vote on, and then everyone will note that the full board is not on Thursday this month. It's on Tuesday, the 19th, because of the holidays, and the holiday weekend is too close to the Thursday. So we should be prepared to present it to the full board on the 19th. I'm gulping a little bit. Eugene, do you have anything to add? I mean, we have to think about our next steps.
Yes, I mean, I think once we get the, I think what we should do as a committee is, I like Frederica's suggestion early on about identifying the ones that are most critical for us within CB2, versus taking a laundry list kind of approach for everything. So I'd like to, I guess, hear from other people on the committee if that's the way others would like to approach our resolution, to first kind of identify of the 18 proposals, what are the 10, 8, 12, that are the most important for us, and focus on those? Or would you prefer to go through and have a comment on each one?
Okay, Anita?
Definitely. I think we should focus in on those issues that affect us the most.
Okay.
Because, everyone is going to have general comments, and we can always add that to everything. But the ones that are really going to impact us drastically,
yeah,
is the ones we should focus on.
Yeah, I think we're limited with the amount of time we have. Go ahead.
Can I answer that for a minute? I think that there are some themes that repeat in the issues that we have, such as the lack of performance standards. So I think when we've gone through the ones that affect us most, we can say there are certain other concerns we have in general, the lack of performance standards for most of what we've seen.
And on top of what Michael's talking about is, the zoning currently right now, a good part of our community board, if I'm remembering correctly, is for local use. But with these changes, we will amplify the destination aspect for us and almost put it on steroids. And that's a concern because it takes away all the small uses that we rely on as a community, a residential community. And I'm not quite sure how to address that because it's so overwhelming. But, we see this with liquor licensing and eating and drinking uses just slowly taking away laundromats, taking away all these other small stores that used to be destinations, retail, meaning that there was one button shop or one other type of store and they're just gone. We lost, a well-known cookbook shop to another community board from our neighborhood, as an example, just to think about. But I guess that's a concern. But the other in our response, are we generally all in agreement on most of these issues, or is there an area where our committee has some disagreement? And I'm just asking us now because that's something that's important to get out, so it's just reflected in the resolution.
Well, I don't know if we can answer that. I feel a little overloaded. I might have to reflect about that.
Well, when are we going to have that discussion? I'm just thinking of the timeline, right? So between now and the third, if we have the resolution on the 13th.
Well, that's
right. Yeah, how are we going to have that discussion?
We need to get that out tonight. Otherwise, we have to have confidence, and in all the different committee members on what is actually going into the draft resolution, meaning it's not a productive use of everybody's time to spend a lot of time on something where there's disagreement versus all these areas where we really know is impactful. And so just getting it out, I think, is important. So I'd love to hear from it.
Could I share the summary of proposals? Maybe that would help to just have that on the screen.
I was just I have a copy in my hand. Absent your suggestion, I was gonna suggest that we just go through it and see who's in favor of addressing individual topics and who, which topics rise to the top.
I'm going to ask George a question about that. George, do you think that your presentation that you gave us gives us the ability to make this comment? Is your presentation tailored closely enough to CB2?
I think there's a lot of CB2 issues in it.
Mark, can we make that full screen?
Sure.
Okay. Well, let's look at the proposals then.
But could I just say, at the city's presentation, I asked Andy Cantu where this community board input is diminished. And then tonight somebody suggested we should find out what's being added where community board input is not included. And I feel that is not necessarily covered in these 18 proposals, but that's something that we should definitely opine upon.
But that's the theme.
Yes.
That Michael was talking about.
All right.
It's the same issue. We would have to go through each one of the changes. We lose the ability to comment. I agree with you, Bridget.
Right. I mean, maybe George can help us to distill that.
George can do that.
And that's something that all community boards would really be would find useful.
Yes.
So does the committee want to go through the 18 points here and say, yes or no? And
I think that's a good exercise.
And then maybe George and Connor can tell us if we're thinking about it correctly. So goal number one, proposal number one, time limits to reactivating vacant storefronts. What, yes or no, that we want to comment?
But I think we should go through every one, but we should look at it through the lens of the character of our district.
Absolutely.
So to me, that's a general thing that doesn't really affect us.
George, do you think that do you think
that George should go through it and tell us?
Well, I mean, I know that in 3, they had a lot of these vacant storefronts in pre-existing uses, right? Where I don't know if that's a big issue in your district. Do you have a lot of these pre-existing non-conforming uses that have been vacant for 2 years because of COVID, right? If they have been, they should have converted into residential use or community facility use. And DOB has not been enforcing this over the past several years, I think, in anticipation of this happening.
So are you recommending that we comment on it then?
You have a lot of these types of uses. Yeah. Is it okay? I mean, really, this is a question for you. Is it okay? Is it okay that they will stay a commercial use even if they're vacant for 2 or more years? I can't answer that for you.
And then we see this a lot because the only place it really comes up where we review this is in liquor licensing. Frankly, most of these places are designed for commercial uses. It's really not an issue. But where it is an issue is where they've improperly expanded.
Yes.
And what we've come across is that we have many non-conforming uses that have somehow mysteriously slurped up an apartment in the back into the business use.
Christopher Street.
And we have a number of those examples. But that's an expansion issue. So outside of that, I'm not so sure it's as impactful for us because those storefronts contribute to the streetscape. And I'm not sure that many of them could easily go back to residential. And then on top of that, I don't think we have much demand for community facility use, unfortunately, because of the cost associated, you know, with real estate in this area. And so I'm not so sure that is something that is a top priority for us. I can see why that might be different, even in CB3, but
the only way then might be this whole issue of expansion, which we have seen in some of the restaurants, and I can think of a couple of examples that have come up. So expansion uses.
And even that is a little bit gray, because there seems to have been some use where there was commercial use with an attached apartment.
Yeah.
And so it's a little unclear to me, but I just don't think it's.
Okay, can we go back, George? Can you helpfully go back to the proposals? Number 2, simplify rules for business types allowed on commercial streets. George, did you find examples of this in our community board?
Well, this is which one is this? This is I think combined with the number 3, right? It ends up being you're allowing essentially everything in your commercial streets, right? You're simplifying rules. What they're meaning is they're getting rid of the distinction between 1 and 2, right? So C1 is local retail, C2 is local service, and so that distinction is almost a distinction without a difference currently. You know, like you can do a very, you know, slightly increased level of uses. Like you could do movie theaters in C2, but you can't do them in C1. You could do certain offices and repair in C2, but you can't do it in C1. I think that this is like something that we already think when we go through our neighborhoods, that there's no difference between these two. I think it's a really minor thing.
I agree. I would not object to these changes.
Okay. So no comment.
Right. I just, the only comment I would throw in is that we have a lot of differences in architecture across streets where they're boundary areas. And I'm wondering if combining 2 adjoining commercial districts if that results in an impact. And you know, if it's always averaging up, so to speak, what's the impact going to be?
I would just add, like, just looking at the map for CB2, you really only have C1, looks like. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you really only have C1, you don't have any C2.
Oh.
It's only on a couple streets. Right. It's like around where we are now. Right. And so it would basically just be allowing, and then there's a C2, there is a C2 along, what street is this? 7th Avenue. So I guess just to give you some context,
you could identify
but I don't see any that are like facing each other directly, like across the street from each other, that are different. I guess this is also like kind of I think a lot of these are also going to be very biased the way that they categorize the changes. And I think that's just something to be wary of. I think it's a good way to structure your recommendations is based on how they structure it. But like, I think this kind of points to the issue that what they say their proposals are very broad. And like, this is kind of misleading because they're going to kind of combine C1 and C2, but then pour in a bunch of new uses to both.
Yeah, that's right. That's the thing.
I think you could address that later on. Like that doesn't have to be this, but I'm just like flag.
This is one of the theme issues.
Yeah.
Not the proposal. Okay. Number 3, George. I'm saying a no on 2, but it's sort of in the theme bucket right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so this is the one that's now you're allowing manufacturing uses in all of your C districts. This is this is the big thing. And you know, this is the one where, you know, if it were a brew pub or a bakery that serves the community, that's one thing. But if it's one that doesn't and ships its good out, is that really what you want in your commercial district?
No, we don't actually. No, you know, there are several examples of. I know in my neighborhood, there was a bagel shop that seems innocent on its surface, but they had a huge wholesale business. So every morning about 4 o'clock, trucks lined up to get the bagels because that's what their business was. It was selling wholesale bagels on top of residences on top of these stores, and it was chaos. There was a bakery, French bakery, did the same thing. And there was production all night long. People were complaining all night long. There was production, and then they were shipping it out at 2 and 3 in the morning to various stores around the city, and at 4 o'clock in the morning. And you know, you could do that in 5,000 square feet. You could certainly do it in 10,000 square feet. There's no question about that. So I think that we need to take a look at this. And of course, all this is as of right. There's none of it. It says that it's by special permit or there's a review process or anything like that. It's all as of right. Is that right, George?
Yeah, this would all be as of right. And the limitations are not by zoning lot, it's by establishment.
That's right.
And any historical person who understands like the way establishment was used in the old Soho NoHo M15B is like you could call, this division over here one establishment, and that division over there another establishment doing relatively similar things. There's ways around it, I guess is what I'm saying.
So these sort of like community bakery wholesale do not rely on retail foot traffic. So, it's not thought out this, and this is something I really feel we should take a position on. And I just want to add one more thing. I think one of the reasons, and you mentioned this, George, is that we're looking at things in 2023 problems that we're having, 2024 problems moving forward. But it's not really a living document, this. I mean, we could build some stuff into this new city of tomorrow to change as the city changes so that we don't have to wait 50 years and get overwhelmed by changes. And maybe along the way, we could have, like you said, maybe we should have looked at this 20 years ago, but we didn't. And make it a little bit easier to modify things as we go forward. But this one is setting us up for another 50 year. I mean, I'm not gonna be around to take care of that, but it's not a living document, that's for sure. It's another fixed document that got us into this problem in the first place.
Thank you, David.
A little bit on what David was saying. We talked about this a lot during the Soho NoHo rezoning in the concept of maker uses, but nobody really was ever able to articulate what exactly that means for the boundaries of what, again, of the impacts. And so a lot of people talk about that over and over again, but you never hear about the differences in impacts here. And what's interesting is that a lot of these uses have been allowed in our areas, and they've just, been phased out because of the cost of real estate. But, most of these, I think to David's point, would be used in ways that you wouldn't anticipate, and they end up having more of a 24-hour nature that isn't compatible with our communities, I think, in a lot of the areas where they would be allowed. So I think that's more my concern, in the C1, C2. I mean, it basically, almost all this is it puts everything as of right?
That's right. That's right.
Just as of right. So you can just do it. And
yeah, no problem.
And that, I think, is the concern when you get to the edges of things, and as some people know here, it's impossible to challenge these things. And even if you do, you'll go, people, and I don't know what the mechanism in the new, you go get a ZRD1, right? Some other, write-up that says, oh, you can do it because you've contorted it to such a way that it's allowable. And that's just the concern that I have with the opening up of this too much without
Well,
clearer definition.
Carter, just in the interest of time, we're going to comment on this. And I move along. Well, we'll continue. Yes, I've taken notes. I'll ask you for some more. This is great. Number 4. Can we see number 4? Who's oh, loading dock. We really didn't.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this. So just to, if you want me to summarize,
no,
essentially, sorry.
1 sentence, 2 sentences, George.
It makes the loading docks rules much more flexible.
Frederica?
Well, I was thinking about when we did the Zara proposal, and they had this enormous space, and there were quality of life issues in the street with loading at all hours. And there was, but the problem was there was absolutely no way to adapt that building because of the historic material. So I don't know. I feel it's important to us, but it's really futile.
What do you think, George? Is this a good one or overall?
That's a very fair summary of it, right? It's important, but what are you going to do? You're going to add loading docks if you get a new tenant that requires more loading berths, and it's loading berths. The requirements are kind of a blunt tool because a lot of these you're in this use group, and so you need another loading berth, but you don't necessarily use it, right? And it's really another one of these things that should be more performance based rather than.
And you can't even put it in if you
add more storage. So you don't have to have so many deliveries.
I think that this kind of gets at like reducing the amount of loading dock berths that are required. So I feel like, and it's a lot less to do with like hours of addition of loading docks and stuff like that, which you can get in other ways. But
no, but if I may say, the example of Zara was that they had turned their entire FAR over to selling, and everything that they were selling was arriving every night.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So there was,
and they were on a little
no storage at all,
and they had a little.
So it required more often, like more frequent loading.
Yes, yes, and there was no. I don't think the building even had a single loading dock. Internal loading dock.
Yeah.
Right. And there was no way to do it because is it a correct characterization to say that the largest buildings are the oldest buildings and the oldest buildings are the historic buildings?
Right.
So nothing's ever going to happen with them. So
well, I mean, I would say you can always mention the issue with that incentivizes a more greater frequency of loading and unloading if you have fewer, and just flag that as an issue. If you wanted to, but it's
if you decrease,
but it's up to you.
Or require more storage.
Yes,
to be built in. As a requirement.
Yeah, but I don't. Should we? It sounds as if we don't want to comment on this extensively. Should we make a brief comment?
I think we have to because we have so much commercial space. And because it's a problem. It's not an easy, great,
Okay, sounds good.
The conflict is you just get stuff moving over sidewalks incessantly.
Yeah.
And it becomes not safe.
So add more storage.
Well, I mean, that's the problem. I don't know how to solve it.
And the noise is intolerable.
Yes. Yeah. It was on a little back that they weren't doing it from their Broadway entrance. Obviously, they were doing it from Mercer.
It's really changing our C zones into M zones.
Who said that? Yeah. Okay.
I did. I'm sorry, David.
Yeah. Number 5.
I think this is important to us. This one.
Oh, this is I think I know it's important to Susan.
I don't think it's possible. I think this is not catering to our community because the likelihood of having several banks of elevators in our rather small floor play. So even though we should of course comment that we don't necessarily want it woven all the way through. I don't think this is really addressed to our type of community.
Yeah,
Where do you see the elevator?
Well, separate elevators to go to the upper floors for a commercial on the upper floors. You have to have separate elevators and stairs or whatever.
Except that George include home business.
No, but that's not. This is different. This is I think more of a not home.
Okay, business. But does this reference elevators?
So you have to have separate entrances, and if you require an elevator, separate elevators. But like, for instance, you could have internal stairs in a 2-floor space, right? That connects the first floor to the second floor. You could also do in relatively short distances what they call hydraulic elevators that you put inside the space, and that would be separate. It wouldn't necessarily have a core to it, but you would have a small elevator that could go up 2 or 3 stories internal to the commercial space. And then finally, I will say that some, especially the industrial buildings, will have 2 elevators, one for service and one for other uses. And you could repurpose the service entrance into the separate entrance for your upper floor commercial in the buildings that have.
Georgia, what does this 1,000 pages cover variances and special permits?
Yes, there are special permits in here. There are not variances in here. You get those from the Board of Standards and Appeals.
So nothing about dispensing with dedicated elevators would be an issue?
I'm sorry. Are all special permits now through the BSA?
No, they did increase some BSA special permits, but they have increased some CPC, City Planning Commission special permits.
It seems like on this proposal 5, combined with no limitations on the amount of people that are being serviced, I could see that this could be chaotic. This could be just chaos. Yeah. You have something as your next door neighbor or on top of you, and it's a hairdresser who has 30 clients, in the first 4 hours that they're open, and you're no longer living in a residential building, So this is one I think we need to really focus on.
Okay, on the list. Any more comments on this? So we can.
I have one comment. I think, when we asked Andy Cantu about this, when he did the presentation, I remember his response was that they thought this would be for only new construction. They didn't anticipate that it would be retrofitting existing buildings. I kind of disagree. I think it's just too tempting to renovate some of these buildings because they would accommodate these structures, and commercial is very valuable.
I agree.
I would say if city planning told us this is for new construction, maybe that should be our comment, that this should be limited to buildings constructed after whatever the date that this passes.
Great comment.
And just as a point, one of the uses that have moved upstairs for us are spas, nail salons, and other things which generally have been on the ground floor. And so you increase the rents on the second floor and then leave a vacancy in your other building on the ground floor because you've created more space when we have too much commercial in some situations here. So
yeah, I mean, I live in a building that we already, the building I live in is a great example of this, where we have commercial spaces on the 6th floor, on the 3rd floor, the 4th floor. It's very chaotic as it is right now. It's hardly enforced. And it seems like something like Proposal 5 and some of the other proposals would, in David's language, I like it. It's very chaotic. It would be very chaotic.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this one we really got to focus on.
Thank you. Number 6. George, what's your overall view of this?
This is the reworking of the use groups, and essentially combining the 18 use groups into 10. and the reclassifications of uses. This is, if you want to like tell them, "Attaboy, good job," I think that this is the part of the proposal I think is good because it updates something that is hopelessly out of date.
Okay.
I'm just going to point out that what was brought up in when they did the presentation was a difference in impact of the eating and drinking establishments versus some of these other type, the bike rental, art studio, furniture stores, and what a greater impact that has on residents' quality of life and everything than these other types of stores do. So lumping that all together with no subcategory could be problematic for that reason.
But I would also say eating and drinking establishments are the lightest commercial use, meaning like you can put them anywhere. And these other things had a lot more restrictions on them. And so they're just combining them together.
But eating and drinking is one of our toughest problems.
Yeah, but it's the other direction, George.
Yeah.
It's going from use group 10, 9, and 7 to 6 if they're all equalized.
Yep, that's right. But the one that you're saying is the most problematic is already 6. Right.
Right. And it would expand the universe. In some cases, you know, for example, use group 9 in Soho and NoHo, use group 9 was an allowable use, but in order to change that, you have to go through some big steps, right, to change that use. But if they're combined, again, you get it as of right without having to file an Alt-1 and go through those steps. So for us, that can be very difficult.
Then, you know, if it's an issue, then keep it.
It's an issue.
Okay.
Okay, it's an issue. Okay, issue. Number 7. Oh, indoor urban agriculture. I asked whether that included marijuana.
Yes, and it would.
I don't think we have the environment for that.
You know, can make a lot of money with it. What does everyone think about? Do we want to comment on this or not?
That only goes, I think, to performance standards again.
Right.
So how do you make
The same issue.
I think it's a larger issue.
It could be a special.
One of our themes.
Right. This needs to have special permit. It just can't be as of right. Sorry.
We've had these, you know, I think in Little Italy, for example, we had a lot of basement agriculture growing sprouts and stuff like that. It may or may not have been legal, but nobody really ever noticed because it didn't smell a lot. I don't know.
Notice it now because we have 600 illegal, you know, cannabis stores in that district. So CB2, you can get drunk, stoned, upstairs, downstairs, in the basements, 2nd floor, 4th floor, 3rd floor.
Rooftop.
Zoning for rooftop.
So do we want to comment on this? Yes or no?
Comment on everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this interacts with, I mean, this is the theme of the performance standards, right? I think that's how our structure our resolution is. We'll have some major themes, but I still think we should comment on these individual 18 because that's how they're structuring the response. I mean, that's how they're expecting the response from us, is my understanding.
Well, they have 18, but they don't necessarily expect us to.
They don't, right. We don't have to comment on all 18. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, number 8.
Boat building, you can leave that one off.
Oh, well, this I'm concerned about because of NYU.
Does anybody, I think they have one building that's near here, right? That's their life sciences building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a danger.
They rebuilt you know, right. That's what I mean. Is it an impact? But I'm just trying to think of an example of what we might already have. And has anybody even noticed it? I mean,
well, you can't even find out about them.
You know, it would have been an as of right use on Gansevoort Street.
Yep.
But would that have been a bad thing? No.
No, it's not a bad thing.
but they couldn't find anybody.
No, they found Google because.
But George, is this the category where you couldn't find out whether it was like what it was and whether it was hazardous?
Well, yes, this is the category where the Department of Health requires registration for certain types, not all, certain types of laboratories, and will not actually tell you where they all are because it's a danger to release their locations. And then, DCP is saying we can put them anywhere. And, this is more, I don't know, again, I don't know what's right. This is more about messaging from the city. Are these things to be concerned about or are they not? And we've gotten mixed messages.
Well, some people, I don't, think that COVID-19 escaped from one of these facilities. That's conspiratorial. I don't agree with it, but, there are biohazards in some of these things and you don't know what they are.
So I will to follow up on that. The Department of Health listed in their justification for their change to the health code for the registration, all of these real life accidents that happened. And when I read it, I was just like, holy crap, this is terrifying. That's what I did as a layperson. And they spelled it out. And I said, yes, you should absolutely require registration of all these because of all of these accidents you've just outlined.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so maybe we should just say not by right, not as.
Yeah, not as of right. Okay.
But it says by CPC special permit, the last sentence.
So that would be for the ones that go into campuses.
Those are commercial, that's just not academic necessarily, or government.
So there's so that they would be allowed anywhere in any C district. And then if you have ones that are in danger, if you have no danger of explosions or fire, they can go anywhere. If they have dangers of explosion or fire, they need a CPC special permit. And then with that special permit, they can actually go into residentially zoned areas as a part of a campus.
Sounds good.
Okay, we'll comment.
Open out anyway.
I think we're assuming that life sciences is just biohazard. Most 99% is for the general welfare. I'd want to encourage that kind of activity.
Of course, we want to encourage safe activity. I agree, Sean. But we want to know if it's not safe.
And aren't most of those really biohazard things done like in a place like Maryland, the Army Corps, whatever it is, the Army's place in Maryland? If it's going to be really something like, the laboratory in Wuhan, hopefully they'll be regulated stringently.
Don't we have a good facility at 6th Avenue, at 2 6th Avenue?
So
it's a life science building.
Sean, my response would be that the Department of Health knows and will tell us where these facilities are. And so I think you're exactly right that most life sciences are completely fine and harmless, but we don't know which ones aren't and where they are.
Okay, I've got that. Thanks, George. Number 9.
Definitely.
Right.
Yes. Move on to number.
Oh, this is a definite. We don't even have to.
Right.
Number 10. Oh, definitely, right? Oh my God. I mean,
that's just what we need.
Okay.
Number 11, George. Oh.
So I think this is one that we do want to, this is a
yes, we don't have to even, I hope we don't have to discuss. We've talked about this quite a bit tonight.
But is this also a theme as well?
Yeah.
Just the conflict.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mixed use is always the conflict, quality of life issue.
Conflict of use. Quality of life standards.
And performance.
That's what zoning's supposed to solve.
Right.
I know. Okay, thank you, George. Number 12.
This is
this is.
So there's a whole bunch of urban design rules, which we didn't talk about. And what they've done is a lot of the special districts had urban design rules and they were all slightly different from each other. They, for the most part, have deleted all of them from the special districts and have new common urban design rules that go from tier A to tier C. And you know, I didn't focus so much on this, one, because I'm not a designer, two, because they're very complicated. And three, they normally do a pretty good job at this stuff. But I'm not attesting that they have in this case.
Is this would this be a concern in an area that has as many historic districts as we have?
You know, ultimately, LPC has final say on landmarks in historic districts.
So I don't think it is.
Good luck on that.
So this is a huge impact, I think, on Little Italy, potentially. I don't know,
Connor,
about that.
But the streetscape regulation?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does kind of replace streetscape regulation. Yeah, it's kind of hard to go district by district or special district by special district, but like, yeah, it's worth maybe flagging in the sense that it's going to change the streetscape regulations to some extent in the special district because it's going to
because special Little Italy zoning.
Right.
That's
like the
Yeah, no.
that's the one.
But why is that the one?
Because that's one of our only special districts here, and it has 3 tiers of requirements that designate the different areas within the SLID, and so the impact could be pretty significant. And I don't believe that any of it is within a historic district. I take that back. That's not true. A little bit of it in the north is in the NoHo, or actually no, it's not in the NoHo historic district, but it has so many. It preceded historic districts in its attempt to convey something, is my understanding. But
Okay,
yeah.
We'll comment on it.
It's worth just comparing the changes, like looking at how it changes the streetscape regulations.
Great street level design right now. We just want to keep it.
Exactly. Thank you, Anita. Okay, number 13. Oh, well, we don't have, do we?
We have that on on 10th Avenue, but that's going to take care of itself.
This is not going to be a priority for CB2.
Yeah, I don't think we have many of these. We have some, but not many.
There might be something on 10th Avenue, but we're.
I think we ought to go to 14. Huh?
14, please, George. Oh, micro distribution.
I like that.
It's interesting. It's better than in the street, which is where it's happening now.
But again, my argument is that it does destroy the retail continuity of the streets that we're trying to strengthen as retail centers. So there's a plus and a minus.
And they do have square footage limitation, but it's true, like it will take up what could be like a retail business with the
and to maintain the consistent retail frontage.
But it would all, yeah, it's kind of.
Should we ask that?
I think we should just check that and look into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, what has popped up is month to month storage for high-end retail when space next door is vacant.
Or like a pop-up or something.
Right.
But are they talking about stores for micro distribution, or are they talking about lanes of parking for
buildings?
I think it's stores.
Stores. Like address the issue of parking
okay.
in the neighborhood.
Well, right now they do the packages right in the street here.
Because right now
that's something that we should.
You're only really allowed storage in M district, right, George?
M and C8.
Yeah. So you're only really allowed storage in outer parts of the city. And so that's why they have to drive them in, and there's nowhere they can put them. This is their pitch.
But we're not talking about the dark stores on 14th Street that have like rolls of toilet paper to the ceiling.
It's like loosely defined. It could include things, and would like a micro distribution facility is not like a goods and services like mom and pop shop. It's going to just be like a part of the building that's used for
just boxes.
It's like a part of Amazon or a larger enterprise, right?
Yeah.
It's not its own thing. It's not a standalone thing.
But the issue is that it's dark, and that's the problem.
It is.
I mean, and I see that they have like this one bullet point about prohibiting papering over windows to deter dark stores, but
it's not going to have like consumers going in.
It's still a dark store.
It's still a dark store, no matter how they define.
Yeah, I mean, if they could paper up like a picture of a store, but it's still a dark store. It's not an actual retail space.
I will say though, that is one of the things that is in our future and will continue to be. So whether it's here or somewhere else, we really need help.
I think we need further discussion on this.
Well, I'm just going to say, as part of the discussion, there are lots of things that you can no longer buy in a store that I can walk to.
Right.
I can only get it online, so it has to be delivered to me. And I'm talking about ordinary things, not crazy things that I need to buy on a weekly basis. But there are too few people who want them, so the stores don't carry them.
No, it's also the rents are too high to give you toilet paper. They want to sell you a T-shirt instead.
Right.
SOS, I cannot.
That's life in the village.
I know, but anyway, so I see what you're saying, Anita.
Yeah.
So what do we want to say about this?
Let's circle it in.
Well, I think it's good. We should talk about it and think about it.
Yeah.
We should come up with alternatives, if not this one.
It's obviously prompted a lot of discussion. But yeah, I think we should circle this and come back to it.
Okay. 15. We're doing very well. We don't have any. What do we? We don't have any NYCHA.
We don't have any NYCHA within CD2, do we?
No, we don't have.
No,
we do not.
No, so
we do not comment.
Does this sound
comment?
So this is the one.
It could also be like
Wait, George. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is the one where you can get an authorization for the 2,500 square foot.
We only have one Michelama in it.
Yeah, and again, this would apply so the larger one, facilitate local commercial space on residential campuses is one. That could be up to 15,000 square feet. But they're also talking, I think this is also the one that includes the corner stores. Oh, it's the next one. Sorry.
Is this not just NYCHA?
So it is not just NYCHA. It is.
That's what you're right. It's not just NYCHA. Okay.
It is not just NYCHA. But
Washington Square Village is maybe one of them.
Yes, that would be one. So
okay.
So you could, but Washington Square Village is a C1 district, so you could do it already.
They already have that.
We already have that.
Yeah, they target NYCHA because all NYCHA is residentially zoned.
Okay.
So it may not apply to you.
It doesn't apply here in CB2.
Yeah.
Okay.
The next one. Yeah.
This is the corner store one.
Yes, that's the corner store one.
Okay, so we do want to comment on this. You've given us some examples.
Yeah, I also want to just flag that there are a lot of new CPC special permits and authorizations and BSA special permits. And I think the important part of that is that like, it's an extra layer of like deregulation with little to no oversight from anybody. Like BSA, the only thing like the council can call up a special permit, right?
A CPC special.
A CPC special permit sometimes, but I don't think even every special permit. I'm not exactly sure, but authorizations no and BSA no. So like there's no, when it says, oh, it's okay because it's going to go through an authorization, like they're not going to say no. They're going to maybe tweak it a little bit and then they'll approve.
Well, we're very familiar with BSA fights as this community board.
Yeah.
But the community board does have a role in that, and the borough president has a role, the BSA, correct? The community board.
I've seen plenty of BSA.
I think there's notice and maybe comment period.
No, we have to come. We have to come.
We've had presidents.
Yeah, I mean, just regarding the there is no hearing on an authorization, right? So in an authorization, a CPC authorization, what we're talking about with this one,
okay,
there is no public hearing. The community board is asked for their input, but the borough president and city council have no role at all.
Hearing, okay.
How would the community provide input without a public meeting?
Well, the community board could have a hearing, but there is no hearing at the CPC, right? The CPC, gets the application and they make the decision, and they may consider your comments, but they will not hear from the public. And
it has to be, there are only two factors, right? Traffic congestion and environmental concerns. Are those the only factors?
I would have to look it up, but I think that I know that those two are, and there may be something else like not alter the essential character of the community.
It sounds like our comment is mostly around our ability.
For us, George.
Oh, go ahead. What?
Can I say something?
I think he froze.
I think it's
George, can you say something where we don't know if you can hear
Yeah,
us?
no, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, now, okay.
Okay.
Anita wants to say something.
Oh, I think this and some of the others really, I question how it's going to impact these historic streets, residential streets that maybe have one or two restaurants, and how that will impact that one, and also lifting the time limits and just the breakdown of a residential street in these village streets. It could become just too commercial.
Anita, you're saying this is a general comment, not a specific one.
Yeah, no, this one and some of the other ones, something I've been thinking about is we want to maybe take a position how we want to either limit that commercial ground floor that sort of spreads down 12th Street or 11th Street, or because it seems like there's a lot of little open funnels for that here. And I don't know that having everything the same is so boring and so uninteresting that really, you know, want to protect the special quality.
Well, I think that can be in the theme.
Yep.
I think that's good.
I think a lot of this is to add into neighborhoods that don't have.
Yeah.
Whereas we have, because we have an older community, we have all these non-conforming uses. So this isn't really helpful to us with the goal of what it's trying to solve, because we already.
Unless
I don't
So only increase more commercial uses when some might argue we already have too many.
Okay.
But I don't see that this one actually pertains to our district.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, it doesn't in the sense that you
we're all-
have spaces that don't have any overlap in commercial. Like you don't have a lot of residential corners that are just residential. Like a lot of your residential pockets have overlap.
So they've
Yeah,
already.
I feel like we already have almost every corner with a corner store.
But, you know, George pointed out that we might have one corner with a corner store, but now the next corner, which is residential, might turn into commercial instead, and that we'll just have more applications at the SLA. I'm having a sinking feeling.
Like, just as an example, think about this for a second. Bedford Street, all residential all the way up. There's a store on every corner. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And if there was one added, you know.
I can think of one empty.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the village as well, right? It's just, there seems to be so many corner stores.
A couple others in the South Village, and we have, you know, maybe in the northern part of one, I'm not as familiar with the art zones there, but I think I might be right, it's really
Not many.
Yeah, it's not very many in our district.
But, you know, I think it goes into our theme of, you know, how much input, you know, is really being allowed. And it says subject to community board approval, but then there are just two categories that they're going to consider. And we might have other things that we want to say about one of these things. So it's definitely in our themes.
then it's an expansion of non-conforming uses.
Yes. Yeah. 17.
The thing about 17 is that whatever the rationalization of the waiver process is, I think the community board should have a role. And that's a theme thing also.
Oh, yeah. Listing to allow for to seat limited. George, how many times, it's in our theme, but how does this apply to us in your opinion?
So, yeah, so this will apply to you if people have applications for bulk modifications, for especially in new buildings or substantial renovations. They can just go for a CPC authorization. They don't require a zoning change. They don't require a variance. So it really cuts out the council members' office. You know, this is a kind of broadside against the city council and their land use powers, but they essentially are saying that, you know, it's too complicated for some of these things, which, you know, they have a fair point. Sometimes it's a relatively small thing and an authorization is the right way forward. But, yeah, you know, so this is not what I focused in on because it's not really clear, you know, how this would affect your district.
Well, Hudson Square. I can see it affecting Hudson Square. The UPS building, Carter.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we've had the Disney building. They took down a lot of buildings and put up this brand new huge thing. And we have more to come in Hudson Square. It's a bit.
Well, Hudson Square has pretty loose
Not over. So
restrictions now.
I think it's a Hudson.
You know, I wonder what the combining storefronts.
No.
Because combining storefronts can change the scale of our community fairly quickly, but I'm not sure if that's restricted anyway. I don't know enough about that, but that jumps out at me. If there were a lot of connected storefronts instead of having, you know, how it impacts the streetscape.
And it fits into the oversight game, I think.
What did you say, Connor?
It fits into the oversight scheme.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it also, like, a lot of the BSA and CPC permits are a way to, like, avoid going through Euler.
Yes.
And so a lot of these things you could do if you submitted a Euler application, and then you'd have to go through every step, including council vote. And so, like, yeah, that's kind of the theme.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. 18, George.
Oh, this is all about, they created, you know, in a separate document that's about 35 pages long, new zoning districts for future mapping that essentially mimic a kind of loft building form. And this is about the new kind of zoning, which doesn't exist yet. I don't think that this is an issue. They just created new zoning districts that they may map in the future.
Okay, so we're not going to comment on that.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 50% of them.
Yeah. What about number?
And then we have.
Can we go back to number 1, George? Go back to number 1, please. Start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Back to the No, I just want to see number 1 because. So what did we decide about this? Did we think it's mildly?
Well, this is part of what I was thinking about is how it could be creeping down, and maybe it shouldn't be a store if it could, you know, most stores found people in all those neighborhoods, but.
This came up with the Milady space, which was vacant for over 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's not realistic in our community for things to go back.
Yeah.
Because they're already non-conforming because they were built before 1938, and most often much earlier than that. I don't think it's an issue because I think that actually puts so much of a burden on a small building owner because they may be struggling for whatever reason to find a tenant that would fit. I don't think.
So we're not going to comment.
I don't think. I mean, does anybody else think it's realistic? No, it's not.
Okay. Fine.
When it says expand existing provisions to historic districts, does that present any kind of threat to us? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. This is my question is, it says lift time limits. Now it came up because of the COVID, which was an unusual time. It could come up with a recession. Is there any, so it's really just making it permanent forever and ever. That's it. That's it. There is no limit on it. It's now legal.
But the issue is that a bad thing? And
why is that a bad thing?
I don't know that we have a consistent answer. If it means maintaining a continuity in the retail streetscape, I think it's a good idea.
Unless there's no other stores around, it's just a leftover.
But it's not imposing a limit, it's lifting a limit.
Just lifts it.
That seems like a good.
It's taking this limit away from our districts where we always have quality of life concerns and historic districts, and we have so many of those. So we don't have a problem with it probably as it exists. We don't know, I'm concerned, I'm hearing some concern around the room because it affects residential districts and historic districts. Yeah. And those people, those places are where we have a lot of conflict.
Well, let me argue for 1 second the other point of view, just argue. It could be an establishment that we want to be in the residential district to serve it, a local bodega, some convenience store that's not there now. So I think we're not 100% sure. Don't want to lift the limit.
And you know, what is the real probability that it would be going back?
Right.
Well, if housing were as big an issue as everybody says, told us, this is the opportunity to reclaim some housing.
I mean, the thing that contrasts this, yes, is just the open question, which kind of belies this whole process. Is there too much commercial space, ground floor commercial in New York City? And every building that's built here, it includes commercial, you know, with rare exception. And a lot of that is still vacant, you know, so, but this part of it, I think is harmful to smaller building owners because changing those use, I mean, these are significant undertakings.
Residential, I mean,
it just doesn't.
Well, I'm going to make a counter argument. Fedora, which has been a huge headache for the SLA.
Yeah.
Fedora. It's like all the other buildings. Someone would grab at the chance to return that to a full residential townhouse.
Why do you think that? Oh,
because that's what we have.
But that space has never been unrented for 2 years. The building did change hands, in fact.
Yes, Dorado sold it.
And nobody sought that out. To plan, I just bring that up. That's a conflict in use of a space versus a vacant space that can't find.
It sounds like we have a lot to say about it.
I bet Andrew has a lot to say about
it. At what point are you going to go back to Andrew and ask him for the list that we asked him for at the presentation about the areas where CB community boards will have reduced input?
That's a good question.
Oh, Andrew Cantu, not Andrew Berman.
No, Cantu, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
But and maybe there were other things that we asked him in addition to that.
The other thing to think about is that
Donna's working on
the landmarks.
Just pulling from the transcript the questions.
And that's many of
you're putting together the
ground floor uses.
I'm not
to him
are
or him.
historic to their design, returning to residential.
But at what point are they going to get it and give it?
I know the store and the residents of below for early buildings. Yes.
So, you know, that's something to consider as well for us, since we have so many historic districts.
As a matter of historic memory, when the 1961 zoning was adopted, it was intentional to reduce the amount of streets zoned for commercial use because it was felt that there were too many commercial streets that were taking away the opportunity for other kinds of construction. It seems to me that what's happening now is this attempt is bringing us back to allowing a greater amount of commercial uses. The historical changes happen. And in 61, it was a clear determination of the City Planning Commission to reduce the amount of commercial street frontage. And now it seems as though this text change is trying to bring back some of it, not all of it. And I think some of it is good. I'm just arguing that point again.
Well, they're bringing back more of it and there are fewer tenants. To take away, so I'm not sure what, you know.
I think they're looking at a future New York City that is recovered from the pandemic, not experiencing any kind of economic.
You're giving them a lot of credit.
But they're not.
I said you're giving them a lot of credit.
Well, fair disclosure, I did work for the city.
No, I
did work for the City Planning Commission, and that was drummed into my head when I was a young person working for the City Planning Commission. I did this intentionally.
1961 population was sliding, and now we're dealing with, well, it split after COVID, but we still haven't housed all the people from the increase of 7 million to whatever we are today. So the housing. It's crazy that housing is last when it's really a top priority.
I think that one of the other things from New York City is sort of what lives in New York City. And it goes back to, I can't remember who said it, but if the rents are too high, that's the problem. It's not a lack of people who are entrepreneurs who will open businesses, is that it doesn't make sense yet. And so that goes back to a lot of the issues that might resolve themselves in the next year or two, or certainly seems to be starting to happen, which is overvaluation of real estate, right? Yes. Because of finance. And so once that's sorted, that may free up a lot of building owners to get a tenant in who might not otherwise be able to now because of the limitations on their finance. Well, and that's a really big issue, and it's probably a huge issue here, given the amount of commercial real estate activity in the last couple of decades.
Well, it's almost like it's like bailing out the banks. It's like real estate's supposed to self-correct itself, right, to some extent, and now instead we've offered every bailout we can throw at them, so there is no self-correction.
George is nodding. George is nodding.
You saw was the reverse here for a while in 2010, 2015, in that area, which is a lot of people got kicked out, a lot of commercial businesses got kicked out because they signed long leases when the rents were really, really low.
Yeah.
And every landlord felt they got cheated out of rising rents. And so the first thing they did, immediately kicked out the business, and then the space is sat vacant for a few years. So
I'm going to ask more about those.
Big cycle of that, and then it sort of went away. But it's just, it's the opposite. Everybody thinks it's worth more.
No, but that's what happened in 2008 when you have a financial crisis. Everything tanked. So a lot of people, to your point about entrepreneurship, many people, I know personally, many people who opened up businesses who never could afford a lease before.
Yeah.
10 years, they had a nice run, conditions improved, and they had to go. They had to leave because rents went up again in 2018, so I mean, it's a cyclical thing, as Anita points out, and you can't. What I think is missing from all of this, I missed the city council. I mean, the CBC presentation. But what's the rationale for this? Because it's somebody else. We've been talking about housing. Of course, housing is supposed to be the priority of the city. Yet this is completely favoring commercial development at the expense of housing. So who is establishing these priorities for the city? I don't understand.
Can I answer that? I think the mayor has established a policy. We need to increase economic activity in New York City, and this is one way to do it.
Well, he has a bias. The City of Yes thing was actually kind of a joke that, got picked up by everybody. But But you know, that's his personality. That's how Adams is. You know, city of yes, he's going to reduce all the restrictions. He's going to let everything happen. He likes nightlife.
And Garodnick reports to him.
Well, of course, but the thing is, it's not, well, you know, as is unfortunately the case. I like Adams, but he has a lot of problems, and they don't follow through. They don't have I don't think they have a coherent philosophy, frankly, for governing. So a lot of these things are so we're going to waste a lot of time hitting these things point by point. But I'm looking for an overall.
Well, it's a very romantic view of zoning.
Yeah, you have the themes, right?
Yeah,
you can sort of speak to in the narrative section as well.
Yeah,
both.
Right, no, it is.
Because they'll hide behind the technicality of it, and if you show them that you know what you're talking about, and you know that you can speak to like the really specific pieces, I think that goes along.
No, but do you think that's what we should do? You think it's a good idea to speak to these?
I think. Well, I mean, this is just my perspective too. I think obviously, like I defer to you all, and this is your document. But I would think that it's good to have both, right? And I think we're trying to do the same in our office, is have both, is have more larger narrative things about like, what is the purpose of this? Like, what are you prioritizing over other things?
Right. I think we should open with something that is like an executive summary of our position and the major themes, and then follow up with the hopefully, you know, so very selective, specific points.
No. One thing we didn't talk about that was raised in the chat, which George talked about, which was university uses that he could put in the chat. Obviously, for us, that's always been a concern, you know, going back a long time. And so I don't know.
So outside of the life, outside of the life.
About new allowances for university uses that George spoke about in presentation, city planning, slides, mentioned university.
You know, Bo, you can catch that presentation is on tape and you can listen to it at 1.5 speed.
Do you want me to read it? There, you see. What about new allowances for university uses?
Really be helpful to us, giving us some of these overarching themes. Okay, if you're comfortable doing that.
So for us, that's always been an issue of
get the overarching themes that are things important too.
Well, we have ours, and I think
city. I don't know if that all.
They lost. Where you lost.
But George, what we're talking about this. We're talking about you. So you want to chime in for a minute?
Well, okay. So I saw that note about universities in the chat. I was trying to think about like what exactly this does to universities, because I didn't talk about universities except as it relates to the life sciences, and that's really where it makes effect. Is there? I mean, or I'm not remembering what I was saying.
Yeah, no, I don't remember exactly, but I know that enough. I think not to speak for Pete, but the concern is sort of that. Are there uses that are under university uses that would be allowed because there are other uses, and would that expansion then put pressure on surrounding areas in our community board from and you know further expansion?
Well, I think I take away we want to review any university expansion uses. Yeah. I mean, that's very important in our community board. And
but wasn't this only about life sciences?
Yeah, but George might be in some other areas.
But yeah, well, just I mean, and according to my major, I'm pretty sure that colleges and university use, as well as like dormitories and other such things, I don't think they change in terms of where they're allowed in which districts. I think you remain the same. It's basically allowed in basically all C districts, and then all R districts. Special permits in R1 and R2, and they're not allowed in C8, but those aren't relevant to you guys. They're basically still allowed where they're allowed.
Okay, so I would, given we've been at it for 3 hours, tribute to everyone's fortitude, but also the importance of this. George, would you be so kind as to circulate your PowerPoint to everyone.
Just send it to me.
What I will do is I'll send it to Mark tomorrow after I've made some edits related to the earlier conversation, but it'll be tomorrow.
Okay, I'm going to put down the word grandfather, which I think Bo might be a grandfather happily, but we don't want to see it.
And circular honors.
Yeah, that's next. Okay, so is there anything else? Oh, and George is going to be looking at Soho, NoHo, and did you also say you would look at Little Italy or
Little Italy, and then I'm going to look at housing a little bit to answer like what the housing increases.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, Connor has kindly brought 5 copies.
Yeah,
I would like one. I'm addicted to paper.
There's a digital version.
But I would
I
like
brought a couple hard copies.
Could I have one?
Leave these to you.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
okay, Connor is going to send this. You heard about it at December 13th meeting if you want to come.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's basically, just so you know, like the first section is like, I basically tried to reduce every change that was substantive in the text changes to a bullet point.
Okay.
And so it's still dense. It's still very dense already. But it's hopefully a better reference point than actually having to go to the text.
Thank you.
And this way you also can see where in the text each change lies, because it's structured by the structure of the zoning resolution. So it's like, if you see a point, you'll be able to reference exactly where it's being changed in this document. So I feel like that could also be helpful for your recommendation. And then the next part is some impact analysis, which a lot of is summarized by George in this call. And then that last spreadsheet part is the breakdown of use allowances in each. And the gray, it's yellow, but I don't have a color there. The gray is like newly allowed. And I might have missed some, but because it's a lot, but
this is great. This is really amazing.
Katie, will you share that with us by email?
Yeah.
Yes, you'll get it by email, Susan. Not to worry. Mark will be circulating things tomorrow. Yesterday. And then I guess that Eugene and I should make a stab at summarizing the things that we heard tonight and
well, there's that, and there's also the follow-up items.
That's the beginning of our resolution. We do have to warn you that HPD wants to come on December 13th as well. So we're not. I'm just warning. I'm not.
Well, are we
because of their clock?
By December 13th? Will we have a better idea of the time frame for this? If we're going to have the extra month or not?
I don't think it matters. Does it?
No, we're going to have to pass
it off extra month.
No.
We need to do it.
We're not to depend on the.
Okay, and what does HPD want? Maybe
they want to come and talk about. We've asked them to wait till January, but they want to come and talk to us about their community visioning report, right, Eugene?
Well, that's
they've compiled the community visioning report, so they'd like to report it to us. This is the one instance where we asked if they could delay to January, and they said they could, but it would delay it would cause further delays. So that's something for the committee to think about. If we want them to come in December 13th, we'll just have to be very strict in how we run that meeting so that we don't run way too over, because it will be 2 very large topics.
Yeah. Well, I get a sense that what is the sense of the meeting about HPD in December?
If they're going to do it, can they provide us all the materials in advance? So that people
can be prepared.
As well, and our reso as well.
Yeah, I mean.
Okay.
But it seems like it's too much.
It's too much.
And what would be the problem with if it was delayed? I mean, what do we lose if it's delayed?
Eugene has it in front of him.
Well, continue going forward with their RFP process, and we don't want to lose any opportunity to collaborate with them.
To influence the RFP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah, I
not
think the
waiting.
RFP is
They'll
the
just
next.
power ahead. Okay.
Yeah.
But is it going to, if they gave us everything in advance and people were able to look at it, how long would it take us to process it and how much? I mean, we already know to some extent what our response might be.
You know what, why don't we ask them,
We
Eugene?
have the capacity
We got
to do
it. I got you. Let's ask them, Eugene, if they, because did it sound as if they have it ready?
I don't think it's ready yet. I didn't get the impression it's ready yet.
I think it'll be ready on December 6th. I think it'll be ready by December 6th from what they
Oh,
said.
and then they can give it to us then.
But I mean, are we expecting?
Let's confirm we can get it from them.
Yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll confirm it.
Expecting a detailed response.
I don't know. We've given a lot. Yeah, that's a little.
I'm just concerned about public testimony.
Oh, I know, but we,
You know,
I think we.
both of these together, people show up.
Okay, we're gonna find out if we can get it in advance. Step one.
What is our obligation regarding public testimony versus their obligation? Well, that's kind of rhetorical. Rhetorical question.
And incorporate it.
Right.
Well, we have been very helpful to them in the process. Our strength and our determination, thank you to all of the committees, have been very powerful, I think. So we've got to continue to be strong. We've got to give ourselves a chance to be strong. Okay, I'm hungry and tired, and I'm sure you are all too.
Michael?
Thank you, George. Thank you.
That was excellent. That was so helpful.
Thank you, George, very much. And thank you to the committee for staying through and going through all of these.
Thank you.
Zoning, does it say that you can't expand a non-conforming use?
It doesn't say you can't expand. There is a section of the zoning